Chapter 1184. Something big had happened in the imperial palace. Ordinary people did not know the reason. The common people only knew that martial law had been imposed everywhere in the capital. There were also bailiffs from Shuntian Manor and the Jingji guards in the city patrolling everywhere. They spread out along the palace walls to search in all directions. Could it be that a spy entered? Some people whispered. As soon as this was said, someone immediately analyzed. No, the Tartars have been completely chased out. Their Khans are dead. I heard that the Tartars are fighting among themselves for the position of Khans. How can they still have the mood to come to Daju to cause trouble? Then what do you think is going on? I'm afraid that something has gone missing in the palace. Otherwise, they wouldn't be searching around the palace walls. The people didn't know what was going on, but the Jingji guards asked everyone they met. Soon, someone spread the news that these people were looking for a 4-year-old boy. Everyone began to guess which family's child would attract the attention of the Gyeonggi guards. Soon, someone guessed that it was a member of the imperial family. Could it be Your Majesty's nephew? I've never heard of Your Majesty's nephew being this age. But the prince, the person who spoke, realized that something was wrong. His eyes widened and he instantly shut his mouth. Everyone was guessing in their hearts. Could it be that the prince had gone missing? The palace was heavily guarded. How could the emperor's son go missing so easily? Perhaps they were imagining things and guessing wrongly. The people who didn't know the truth didn't dare to talk nonsense anymore. Instead, they began to worry about themselves. Those bailiffs were very overbearing. There was no guarantee that one of the bailiffs would take revenge on a private matter. What if they took this opportunity to harm their families? The atmosphere in the capital, which was already oppressive, became even more tense. The nobles in the palace were frightened, and the people were not spared. If it was like this in the capital, then what about the palace? Within the walls of the palace, everyone's lives were thrown into chaos. In order to search for the prince's whereabouts and any clues, countless palace servants were implicated, and many innocent people were taken advantage of to get rid of them. Because of Li Helan's death, the Empress Dowager had fallen seriously ill. She had been clamoring for Li Chitian to avenge Li Helan, but Li Chitian had never responded. The Empress Dowager was disheartened. Now the palace was in chaos. Even if Li Chitian and the Empress didn't deliberately tell her, the Empress Dowager had heard it from the palace maids around her. What did you say? You're saying that the one who went missing was Hao? Seeing that the Empress Dowager's face was livid, the palace maid knelt down in a panic. I just heard it from the guards who were searching. I don't know what exactly happened. The Empress Dowager's face was deathly pale, her eyes glazed over. It took her quite a while to catch her breath, and then she shouted, "Why haven't you called the emperor here yet?" The palace servants complained incessantly in their hearts. The imperial study used to be a cushy job, but now, everyone wanted to avoid it. If the prince really went missing, it would be lucky if the imperial study didn't get angry. What's more, the Empress Dowager had such an attitude. If they went to find the emperor, wouldn't they be implicated? Then Mammy Li, the personal servant of the Empress Dowager, comforted her. "Empress Dowager, don't be anxious. Your Majesty didn't tell you about it because he was afraid that you would be worried and hurt your health. The little prince is blessed by God. Nothing will happen to him." The Empress Dowager sat up with the big pillow. When she moved, the joints all over her body were cracking. Holding her forehead, she felt dizzy for a moment. Her vision turned black, but the Empress Dowager didn't care about it at all. "They are deceiving me, an old woman without real power. That wastrel Madame Zhong, does she think that if she keeps it a secret, I won't punish her? Call Madame Zhong over." Obviously, the Empress Dowager was extremely angry, but she could still keep her reason. She knew that it was useless to make a scene in front of the emperor. But the empress was easy to control. If she wanted to ask something, it was easier to get a satisfactory answer from the empress. The palace servants breathed a sigh of relief. At least the Empress Dowager still had some reason and knew to avoid the emperor. Someone rushed to the Palace of Earthly Tranquility to invite the empress. At this time, the empress was eating the bitter medicine in the small white porcelain bowl and snow-white spoon brought by the palace maids. The chief palace maid, Ruolan, persuaded her softly, "Your Majesty, since the old mamas around you were sent out of the palace to recuperate, your health has been poor. Now you are anxious because of the prince, but you can't ignore your health. If you fall ill, who can wholeheartedly keep an eye on people to find the whereabouts of His Highness?" The Empress lowered her eyes, and her eyelashes covered the emotions in her eyes. Her pale lips sipped the black medicine as if she couldn't feel the bitterness. She quickly took the medicine, took a bite of the blue and white carp, and almost rinsed her mouth. She covered her mouth with a handkerchief and spat it into the lotus basket basin. Then she asked, "Is there any news? Did you find any clues near the Imperial Garden?" "Your Majesty, the palace servants who were on duty in the Imperial Garden have been arrested. Your Majesty ordered people to interrogate them one by one. Your Majesty even arranged for people to search for the whereabouts of the several imperial concubines in the harem. Don't worry, the prince will be fine." The Empress nodded and lowered her head again with a worried frown. The palace servants knew that the Empress lost her beloved only son and was sad. They also knew that their persuasion was useless, so they all quieted down. At this time, the palace maid in front of the Palace of Earthly Tranquility came in to pass on a message. "Your Majesty, the Empress Dowager ordered people to invite you over." Perhaps the Empress Dowager found out about His Highness. The Empress' heart trembled. She calmly thought for a moment before standing up. "I know. I will go immediately." The palace servants helped the Empress change clothes and comb her hair, but the Empress waved her hand and refused. Her face was haggard, and her pale face had a waxy yellow color. In just 2 or 3 days, she had lost a lot of weight, and her cheeks were sunken. Just as she walked out of the Palace of Earthly Tranquility, the Empress felt dizzy and her vision darkened. Before she could step on the shoulder, she fell to the ground. "Empress!" The palace servants were shocked. "Quick, call the imperial doctor." The Empress fainted. The Empress fainted, and the Imperial Institute of Medicine panicked. The Empress Dowager was so angry that she beat the Arhat bed, making the rosewood Arhat bed sound. Ijia thinks she did it on purpose. She lost Ijia's good grandson and has no way to explain, so she pretended to faint to deal with it. "Tell the Emperor for Ijia. If something really happened to Brother Hao, Ijia only wants them to pay with their lives for the child. What are they doing all day? Such a group of people, but they can't even keep an eye on Brother Hao." The palace servants didn't dare to say more and could only agree. Li Chitian soon received the news that the Empress had fainted and the Empress Dowager was furious. The prince had gone missing, and the city had sped up the search. However, Pang Xiao's army was about to reach the city in 2 days. All the things that didn't belong to Ru Yi were put together, and Li Chitian was already in a terrible fix. "Tell people to contact Duke Ding. No matter what, they must pass on my word. If they can't do it, they can bring their heads to see me." In Pang Xiao's camp, there was a lot of laughter. As night fell and the sky darkened, bonfires were lit everywhere in the camp. Other than the soldiers on duty who were in charge of patrolling, the rest of the people were sitting on the ground beside the bonfires, roasting their dry rations or the game they had caught themselves. Pang Xiao was very happy today. He drank a jar of wine with Ji Zheyu and Mu Jinghu, but he still didn't feel satisfied. Qin Yining was already tired. She covered her mouth and yawned. Pang Xiao smiled and said, "You're tired. Why don't you go to sleep first? The children have already gone to sleep with the wet nurse. You don't have to be too tired. Just have a good sleep first." Qin Yining nodded. When she came to Pang Xiao's side, she no longer had to be on tenterhooks. Her safety was guaranteed, and her mind was completely relaxed. She didn't have to worry about the children, and she didn't have to worry about her own safety. Pang Xiao's suggestion was exactly what she wanted. She felt that she hadn't had a good sleep for a long time. "Then I'll go back. Don't drink too much wine." Qin Yining stood up and bowed to the others. Mu Jinghu, Ji Zheyu, and the others also cupped their hands to return Qin Yining's greeting. When Qin Yining was far away, Ji Zheyu smiled and teased, "You're not going back to accompany your wife?" Pang Xiao drank another mouthful of wine and smiled. Drinking wine is more important. Today's in a good mood, so it's best to drink wine. Come, cheers. Don't drink too much. That's all we have. Drinking wine will make things worse. Ji Ziyu persuaded. Pang Xiao nodded and didn't argue further. He began to talk about the matters of the capital while drinking wine. At this time, many soldiers had gathered together to chat. There were even some who took off their shirts to show off their martial arts skills. Pang Xiao was excited to see this. He also went to wrestle with someone. His strength was astonishing and his movements were nimble, causing the soldiers to shout repeatedly. Ji Ziyu got up and went to the surrounding forest to relieve himself. When he was about to return, he turned around and sensed a dark figure waving at him from the outermost camp. Ji Ziyu was immediately alert. Just as he was about to warn him, the person hurriedly knelt down and said in a low voice, "Duke Ding, listen to me." This was an unfamiliar voice, and the person was kneeling in the shadows, so he couldn't see the person's face clearly. Ji Ziyu didn't want to give this person any chance to turn the situation around, so he walked over with the horsewhip in his hand. "Duke Ding." The person spoke anxiously, but he still didn't dare to speak loudly. He only tried to persuade Ji Ziyu, "I'm here under orders to bring you a few words. I'm here alone, and I have no ill intentions." Ji Ziyu raised his eyebrows. He was curious about how Li Chitai was going to persuade him this time. Seeing that Ji Ziyu didn't immediately call for someone, the person in the shadows sighed in relief. He walked out a little and knelt down. "I'm Chenan, Your Majesty's secret guard. I'm here to deliver Your Majesty's message. You and Your Majesty are sworn brothers. Now that the world has just stabilized, it's really not the time for us to fight among ourselves. Duke Ding is a loyal man, so you'll naturally put the safety of the people first. I hope that Duke Ding can help settle this matter for the sake of our brotherhood." "How do we settle it?" Ji Ziyu was curious. Chapter 1185. Ji Ziyu didn't say anything. He just stood there silently with his hands behind his back and looked down at the person kneeling not far away. Chenan looked at Ji Ziyu uneasily. When he saw that there was no change in his expression and that he didn't seem to be angry, he continued, "Duke Ding, you're a hero. Your reputation can't be ruined because of a moment of anger. If you insist on helping the traitor, won't you become a traitor yourself? How will the history books record you in the future?" Ji Ziyu still didn't say anything. He just slowly paced a few more steps. Although Chen An was a spy who had followed Li Chitian for many years and understood the power of an emperor, Ji Ziyu was a person who had fought bloody battles on the battlefield all year round. Moreover, Ji Ziyu had just returned from the Taitan battlefield. His murderous aura was even more terrifying than Li Chitian's power of an emperor. Chen An swallowed his saliva and carefully observed Ji Ziyu's expression. When he saw that he still didn't show any signs of anger, he was relieved. "Duke Ding, you're a smart person. You must be able to see how much sincerity I've brought with me to this place. Please reconsider. Firstly, you have to be loyal to the emperor. Secondly, you have to ensure the stability of the world. Most importantly, you have to care about your reputation. Moreover, Anyang Princess Royal was killed by the Qin clan. If Duke Ding insists on helping Pang Xiao, who knows how many people will hate you and insult you behind your back in the future? Are you really willing to accept this?" At this moment, Ji Ziyu had already walked up to Chen An. He was tall and had a peerless appearance. When he looked at people expressionlessly, he gave off a sense of superiority. Coupled with the murderous aura around him, cold sweat broke out on Chen An's back. However, Ji Ziyu's voice was very calm. "So, you've been calling Pang Zhishi a traitor? How did you spread rumors to slander him in the capital?" When he heard this, Chen An immediately felt that something was wrong. "Duke Ding, why are you siding with the traitor? You still dare to say that?" Ji Ziyu bent down and casually grabbed Chen An's neck with one hand as if he was plucking a flower. He lifted Chen An up effortlessly. Chen An's eyes were wide open as he stared at Ji Ziyu in disbelief. He gasped for breath. Ji Ziyu smiled. He leaned closer to Chen An and whispered, "Do you know what I can't stand the most?" Ji Ziyu didn't give Chen An the chance to speak and said, "What I find most unbearable is those people who are obviously filthy to the point their souls are even more disgusting than the mud in a pigsty, yet they just so happen to pretend to be noble and pure, and they treat others as blind and idiots to deceive them. Yet they don't know that the stench they carry is something that can't be concealed by the layer of skin that looks like a human. Chennon's mouth was wide open. He kicked his legs and tried to grab Jizayu's hands, but it was to no avail. Your master is such a thing. He's jealous of the talented, ungrateful, and treacherous. He's shameful and laughable. Chennon couldn't say a word. He seemed to have no reaction to Jizayu's insults. He was so suffocated that he almost couldn't hear. When Jizayu saw Chennon's reaction, he suddenly tightened his grip. A cracking sound came from Chennon's throat. He fell to the ground like a puppet with its strings cut. Blood gushed out from his nose and mouth. Jizayu took out a snow-white handkerchief from his sleeve and wiped his hands in disgust before casually tossing it onto Chennon's body. After that, he walked towards the camp with his horsewhip in hand before calling his trusted aide over. Go, clean it up. Also, send more people to protect the tents near the main tent where Wang Yi's family members are staying. Increase the patrols. Don't let anyone take advantage of this loophole. Yes, sir. The trusted aide was a little surprised that Jizayu had said so much in one breath. However, he didn't dare to delay and immediately went to give the orders. When he returned to the campfire, Pang Xiao had already finished his wrestling and was drinking a bowl of wine. When he saw Jizayu return, he smiled and asked, "Ah Lan, you're here too?" Jizayu smiled, "Forget it. It's not the time for us to relax yet. Don't drink anymore." Pang Xiao smiled and nodded. He walked around the crowd and patted Jizayu's shoulder. Then, he casually tied up his messy hair. "It's fine. I'm just happy that our family can be reunited." The two of them walked side by side towards the main tent. Pang Xiao raised his arm to tie up his hair as he walked. Jizayu followed slowly. Jizayu could tell that Pang Xiao was completely unguarded against him. In fact, if he wanted to harm Pang Xiao, it would be easy for him to succeed. It was no wonder that Li Chitian chose him to persuade him. However, he didn't have such thoughts at all. Thinking about what Chennon said just now, Jizayu couldn't help but sneer. Li Chitian had a good plan. He wanted him to kill Pang Xiao. If he couldn't kill him, he could capture him alive. What kind of person did he think he was? Although he, Jizayu, wasn't a gentleman, he knew that there were things that he should do and things that he shouldn't do. Pang Xiao had never done anything that went against morality. He had also never violated the oath they made when they rose up against Biji's tyranny. On the other hand, Li Chitian, who had ascended the throne, went against his promise. He was selfish and didn't care about the suffering of the people. He was willing to sacrifice the lives of innocent people for his own selfish reasons. If he could share his wealth with such a person, wouldn't he also be a scum? No matter what, he, Jizayu, knew what was right and what was wrong. The two chatted for a while more before they went back to rest. The next day, after a day of rapid marching, the front of the army could already see the capital's city walls. Pang Xiao didn't allow anyone to act rashly. He only ordered them to set up camp when they arrived. When the guards at the city gates saw the sea of people coming, they were so scared that their faces turned pale. They ran down the city walls in a panic and shouted, "Close the gates, close the gate. The rebels are attacking." The clear sky was clear and cloudless. Even the cool breeze from time to time couldn't dispel the panic in people's hearts. The entire area in front of the city gate was in a state of chaos after being disturbed by such a panicked voice. The people who were going in and out of the city gate were now crazily running into the city. Dust flew everywhere on the road. Even the city gate was closed with a bang. There were shoes, bags, and carts that people didn't have time to pick up on the ground outside the city. When the Taytan people attacked, everyone had the same reaction. Seeing the city gate close, the Tiger Army and the Southern Peace Army didn't care and only listened to orders to set up camp. The soldiers that arrived later also advanced according to the formation. With the northern city gate as the starting point, they moved to the two sides of the city. It was clear that they wanted to surround the entire city. Moreover, the 300,000 soldiers that Pang Xiao brought did have the ability to do so. The soldiers guarding the city quickly went to the palace to report the situation. The city immediately became chaotic. The streets and alleys were filled with people discussing this matter. No one was willing to lose their lives. When the soldiers arrived at the city gates, no one could pat their chest and say that Prince Zhongshiren wouldn't kill anyone. However, compared to the soldiers guarding the city and the officials of the imperial court, the people were more relaxed. After all, Pang Xiao wasn't the type to kill innocent people. Everyone was just worried about being caught in the crossfire. Your Majesty, quickly give the order. What should we do now? The officials of the imperial court who were smarter and more resourceful were all called to Yongshan Palace Hall. Li Qitian's face was ashen as he paced back and forth on the ground. You came to ask me? Did I raise all of you for nothing? At the crucial moment, you come to ask me about everything. What's the use of having all of you? Li Qitian was so anxious that he was sweating all over. The courtiers were also at a loss for what to do and were in a state of disarray. When they saw Pang Xiao's soldiers arrive at the city gates, they finally understood the terror of a large army. It was a kind of mountain flood and tsunami attack. Ordinary people couldn't save them. Your Majesty, the only thing we can do right now is to not start a war. Once we start a war, the army will directly charge in. How can we win? At that time, the people will be in a terrible situation. That's right. Your Majesty, you must think of a way to stabilize Pang Xiao. You must not start a war. Li Qitian frowned and gritted his teeth. You mean to say that you want me to immediately ask for peace? So that Pang Xiao won't lead the army in so that you can save your worthless lives? Your Majesty, we don't care if we die, but we feel sorry for the people in the court. Besides, how can we strike a stone with an egg right now? The faster we start a war, the faster Daju's destruction will be. Impudent. Li Qitian turned around and glared at the old official who spoke. Only then did he realize that the people who spoke just now were all Northern Ji's remaining elders. Yu Zichio. Could it be that this is your way of being a subject? Your loyalty is to endlessly slander the dynasty, to slander the emperor? Your Majesty, please calm down. This official didn't mean that. It's just that now that the soldiers are at the city gates, if we want to protect your Majesty, the imperial family, and the people, we can only find a way to not start a war. That's right. Your Majesty, please forgive this official's crimes. To say something unpleasant, more than 10 years ago, when Pang Xiao and Jilan led the army to attack the capital, it was a tragic situation. The people in the city closed their doors and didn't walk on the streets. In the end, it was better. They were just frightened. However, how much burning, killing, and looting happened within the palace walls? Could it be that your Majesty personally experienced it and doesn't remember? Song Quan, you're impudent. Is that something you can mention? When Li Qitian was reminded of the experience of destroying Northern Ji, he couldn't help but glare angrily and point at the person who spoke. This was also a Northern Ji elder. He usually didn't show off his abilities, but now, his words were sharp and piercing straight into people's heart. Song Quan didn't care at all and directly said, Your Majesty hasn't forgotten, right? Back then, Your Majesty issued a decree, so almost no one within the palace walls was spared. If we really start a war now, Pang Xiao and Jilan will inevitably repeat the same mistakes. Back then, Your Majesty, Jilan overwhelmingly defeated Northern Ji. Now, the two of them are still in an alliance, but Your Majesty is standing on the opposite side. Li Qitian felt as if someone had poured a bucket of cold water over his head, and his entire body trembled. Chapter 1186. Li Qitian could never have imagined that he would one day be stuck in this dilemma. He wasn't stupid, but he couldn't remember how he had allowed things to develop to this point. Your Majesty, Pang Xiao's group has already deployed their troops outside the city. If you don't make a decision now, I'm afraid it will be too late. The officials led by Yu Zichio, Song Quan, and the others all knelt down. Your Majesty, please prioritize the safety of the people. Li Qitian looked at the officials kneeling on the ground. His eyes were empty for a moment, but after a moment of extreme anger, he burst into laughter. His smile grew deeper and deeper. Laughter overflowed from his throat like a broken windbox. Ridiculous, Extremely ridiculous. Li Qiqian's smile faded. He pointed at the kneeling officials. What do you mean by prioritizing the people? Aren't you thinking about the safety of your entire family? If I ask for peace, I will be the ruler of a destroyed country. When the time comes, you can just continue to pledge allegiance to Pang Xiao like you pledged allegiance to Diegu? Everyone understood what he meant, but when it was put on the table, it really wasn't acceptable. This was because most of the officials kneeling on the ground were surrendered officials of BG. Their thoughts had indeed been stirred up by the repeated proclamations. After all, it had only been 10 years since that incident. The deep-rooted sense of belonging couldn't be completely changed overnight. Moreover, in order to build the imperial mausoleum for himself, His Majesty didn't even care about the lives of the people. He even wrote IOUs for the salaries of the officials. To serve such a ruler, the fact that they were firm in their beliefs and didn't immediately leave Diegu to avoid the disaster was already a sign of their determination. Seeing that the officials didn't say anything and were all kneeling like wooden pillars, Li Qiqian became even angrier. However, he couldn't say any more insults. What was the use of being angry now? What was the use of being anxious? Even if he killed all these people in a fit of anger, it wouldn't change the current situation. It would only make him as embarrassed as a defeated rooster. The spy sent to find Ji Ziyu still hadn't returned. Ask for peace. He didn't have anything more important than unifying the country to persuade Pang Xiao to give up the world at his fingertips. The only thing he could do now was to pray for a miracle and wait. He was waiting for a massacre, waiting for a release. At that time, he would be filled with hot blood and people would say that at least he, the emperor, was not a coward who opened the door to surrender. How pathetic. What a joke. Percent Wang Yi, according to your orders, the flanks have completely surrounded the capital. As long as you give the order, it will be taken down within a day. Pang Xiao nodded and ordered with a serious face, tell everyone not to disturb the people, not to burn, kill, and rape. Anyone who disobeys will be punished according to military law. Yes. The deputy general relayed the message. Ji Ziyu asked, when do you plan to attack? Pang Xiao raised his eyebrows and smiled. There's no hurry. Everyone has traveled a long way, so we should give them some time to adjust. Ji Ziyu pursed his lips and smiled. He crossed his arms and said, do you think I don't understand you? You just pity the people in the city and give our people time to prepare. At the same time, give the people some time to adjust. In the future, if they can hide in their homes and try not to come out, many people will be saved. Pang Xiao laughed and patted Ji Ziyu's shoulder. Forget it, you're right. His eyes were gloomy and helpless. At first, I didn't want things to be like this. No one had the ability to predict the future. 2 years ago, Pang Xiao would never have thought that he would one day lead 300,000 soldiers to surround the capital. He didn't think that so many people would be willing to follow him and do such a rebellious thing. These people saw him as a leader, so he had to be a leader that met everyone's expectations. Otherwise, he would definitely fall in the future, just like Li Qiqian. Speaking of which, things were really beyond his expectations and he was very tired. But when everything was no longer about his personal interests, but the interests of many people, he had no other choice. Wang Yi, Xie Yu and Xu Weiji came forward and bowed to Pang Xiao and Ji Ziyu. I wonder if Wang Yi intends to use peaceful means before using force or directly crush them with military strength. Do you intend to negotiate with His Majesty? Pang Xiao shook his head. There's nothing to talk about. But we don't want to attack immediately. Let's leave it at that for now. Yes. Xu Weiji smiled. Anyway, even if we don't do anything, it's enough to make them panic for a while. Pang Xiao nodded and looked in the direction of the capital with his hands behind his back. The banners flapped loudly in the wind. Past the fluttering banners and across the plains, one could see the towering capital standing alone. Behind it was the undulating shape of a mountain range, but everyone knew that the mountain was still far away. Pang Xiao's soldiers surrounded the capital just like that. They didn't attack, nor did they do anything. It was because of this silent attitude, coupled with the strong contrast in military strength, that all of the citizens were very frightened. Qin Yining and Qin Huiyuan sat side by side in front of the tent and looked at the people talking not far away. Qin Huiyuan said, "It's been too long. I'm sure the citizens in the city are terrified to a certain extent. This isn't a good thing for Yu Jishi. Everyone cares about their own lives. No one wants to lose their lives. Now that we're isolated outside the city gates, I don't know what Li Qitian's people will say about us in the city." Qin Yining rolled his eyes and came up with an idea. "I've put in a lot of effort to build up Wang Yi's reputation. We can't let others ruin it at such a crucial time. Why don't we use the same trick again?" Qin Huiyuan raised his eyebrows. He obviously understood what Qin Yining was talking about. "You want to use the method from Shi Yu?" "Yes. But we'll change it this time." Qin Yining stood up and patted the hem of his skirt. He smiled and said, "Father, I'll go talk to Wang Yi." "Go ahead." Qin Huiyuan leisurely picked up his teacup and took a sip of tea. Qin Yining quickly walked over to Pang Xiao and the others. Ji Ziyu saw Qin Yining walking over first. He stopped talking and nodded at Qin Yining in greeting. Qin Yining smiled and bowed. He immediately said, "I just thought of an idea." Pang Xiao lowered her head and looked at Qin Yining. She saw the light in his bright almond-shaped eyes and the crafty expression on his face. He looked like a cunning little fox. He couldn't help but smile and squint his eyes. He bent over and leaned closer to Qin Yining. "What's the idea? Let's hear it." Qin Yining smiled and covered his mouth. He whispered a few words in Pang Xiao's ear. Pang Xiao's tall body bent down to match Qin Yining's height. It was as if he wanted to protect her in his arms. Both of them were extremely beautiful. In the eyes of others, this scene was so beautiful that they couldn't bear to disturb it. Ji Ziyu looked expressionlessly in the direction of the city wall. After a moment, he smiled. Pang Xiao nodded repeatedly and scratched Qin Yining's nose. "You're so clever." Qin Yining touched his nose and smiled. "I'm just suggesting. I don't know much about war. You can discuss it with Mr. Xie and the others. I'm going back to have tea with my father." "Okay, go ahead." Pang Xiao looked at Qin Yining's back gently and attentively. She called Ji Ziyu, Xie Yu, and Shu Weiji to discuss it. The Jingji guards guarding the city stood on the North Gate Tower. They looked at the snow-white sea in the distance with melancholy. When they looked up, they suddenly saw a round object flying in the sky. That object floated and flew higher and higher. It was heading towards the capital. The Jingji guards didn't dare to be negligent. They hurriedly shouted, "Sir, look at what that is." When everyone heard this, they hurriedly came over and looked up at the sky. "It looks like a kite. There's more than one." As they spoke, several kites of different shapes flew over. They looked down along the thin lines of the kites and saw a few fast horses galloping under the city gate. The riders on the horses were wearing the Tiger Army's black soft armor. They were holding the kite's reel in their hands. What are they trying to do? Are they trying to provoke us? We didn't open the city gate to fight, so they're here to look down on us? The Tiger Army has always been brave and fierce. Now that Prince Zhongshiren is leading them, they probably want to fight. They're so bored that they're playing with kites. The Jingji guards all guessed that they were boosting the enemy's morale and undermining their own. However, the Shangguan didn't refute them because they felt the same way. Even when they saw the Tiger Army riding back and forth under the city gate and leisurely flying kites, they didn't dare to be rash. They didn't dare to shoot an arrow first, afraid that it would start a war. After the time it took for 2 incense sticks to burn, the kites flew higher and higher. They were already above the city. Suddenly, a kite fell from the sky in a circle. Upon closer inspection, they saw that the string was broken. Before the Jingji guards could be surprised, they suddenly realized that the kites had broken their strings and fell directly into the city. Everyone looked down and realized that the string was cut off by the Jingji guards themselves. They deliberately used the wind to let the kites fly into the city. Then, they cut the string and let the kites fall freely. The Jingji guards felt that something was wrong. One of them hurriedly reported to the Shangguan. The Shangguan hurriedly ordered someone to inform Your Majesty. Another group of people entered the city to think of a way to find the kites. Just as this news was being reported up the chain of command and the people below were anxiously looking for the kites, there were already commoners in the city who had picked up the kites that had fallen on the streets. They could clearly see the words on them. They were written in plain language so that all commoners could understand them. The meaning was also very simple. Prince Zhongshiren will not massacre the city and will not harm any innocent commoners. The commoners are innocent. If you don't want to participate in the struggle of the imperial court, you only need to hide in your homes and close your doors. The Tiger Army and the Southern Pacifying Army will not disturb the commoners. The person who picked up the kites happened to be literate and had always admired Prince Zhongshiren. When he saw what was written on it, he immediately read it under the curious gazes of the surrounding people. The surrounding commoners were all very surprised. Prince Zhongshiren deliberately thought of a way to tell us this. That's right. How could Wang Yi think of using a kite to send us a message? I told you Wang Yi wouldn't kill the innocent. Naive. Have you ever seen a war without killing commoners? Chapter 1187. Most of the common people did not understand the disputes in the court. They did not care who was right and who was wrong, who was black and who was white. In these chaotic times, what everyone hoped for the most was that their family could live well. Originally, everyone was worried and doubtful. Even though Pang Xiao had a reputation for being benevolent and righteous over the years, the common people respected him greatly. Pang Xiao was also feared by the emperor and his entire family had been persecuted. Everyone was filled with sympathy for him as a tragic hero. However, when war was about to break out, no one could completely relax. They could not guarantee that Pang Xiao would not harm them. But now, everyone saw Pang Xiao's intentions. He sent a message into the city with a paper kite, telling them that as long as they did not walk around and did not cause any misunderstandings, they could keep their lives. Wang Yi even promised that they would not disturb the lives of any of the common people. Everyone's hearts were filled with hope and the news on the paper kite quickly flew through the streets as if it had grown wings. No one knew when Pang Xiao would attack, so very quickly, everyone in the capital began to rush to buy food. In the imperial study, Li Chitian looked at the paper kite presented to him. His hands gradually clenched and his eyes were filled with panic and confusion that could not be hidden. This paper kite was the final warning, the warning that the Tiger Army and the Peace Southern Army would launch an attack on the capital. He was the emperor, but he had no money or people in his hands. Seeing the butcher's knife about to fall, he could only close his eyes and stretch out his neck to be killed. What are the reactions of the common people in the city? After a long while, Li Chitian finally spoke with difficulty. The secret agent lowered his eyes and thought for a long time before carefully replying to Your Majesty, the common people seem to have relaxed a lot. Li Chitian took 2 steps back and powerlessly sat down on the bright yellow chair made of Paulownia wood. His entire body seemed to have lost all of its strength. He leaned back and could not speak for a long time. There was a voice in his heart that kept asking himself, what exactly did he gain after all these years? Was he not the emperor that everyone wanted? Why was it that at this critical moment, no one was willing to reach out and help him? Was this the hypocrisy of the world? Seeing that he was about to be defeated, those bastards retracted their necks and no longer wanted to care about him, the emperor. He had been in power for 10 years. He had lived in glory and riches, but now, he was forced to such a state. What should he do? Your Majesty. Xiong Jinshui quickly walked into the imperial study. Lord Yu, Lord Song, and several other lords request an audience. Li Chitian was a little irritated. He didn't want to see them at first, but when he thought that they might have found a way, he immediately stood up and became spirited again. Let them in. Yes. Xiong Jinshui retreated. Not long after, a flurry of footsteps could be heard from outside the hall. Li Chitian found it a little strange. Yu Ziqiu, Song Quan, and the other elders of Biji were the most learned from their families. Whatever they did, they had to pay attention to the rules. Now that they had come to the imperial study to reply, their footsteps were so messy. It was really strange. Right at this moment, the spy who was kneeling on the ground suddenly stood up. His face was tense as he looked towards the palace door. His eyes became more and more focused, but his expression became more and more panicked. Your Majesty, there's a large group of people surrounding us. Li Chitian turned pale with fright. He said in disbelief, "What did you say?" Your Majesty, the footsteps outside aren't right. There are at least a few hundred people coming from all directions. Li Chitian's heart skipped a beat. The color of blood instantly receded from his face. His hands and feet felt as if they had been plunged into ice caverns. It was so cold that his entire body trembled. Pang Xiao is attacking. Li Chitian cried out in alarm after a long while. Unexpectedly, just as he finished speaking, Yu Zichou's voice came from outside the palace door. Don't panic, son of heaven. We're only here to petition for the people. Li Chitian knew that the situation was bad. He forced himself to calm down and quickly walked to the door. Creak. He pushed the door open. In the open space in front of the imperial study stood a great number of imperial guards and imperial guards. There were at least 200 to 300 people. These people all carried weapons in their hands and focused their gazes on the imperial study. One had to know that normally, no one dared to just look at Tian Yang. Li Chitian pretended to be calm and asked in a clear voice, "You're impudent. This is the imperial palace. You've gathered so many people outside of our imperial study. Could it be that you want to rebel?" Yu Zichou's face wore an official's smile. His voice was full of indifference as he said, "Your Majesty, please calm down. This subject didn't have such intentions." Didn't have such intentions? Then what's the meaning of you standing here today? Could it be that you've brought the Imperial Guards, and Imperial Guards to perform a battle in front of us? Yu Zichou smiled. There's no need for Son of Heaven to be so anxious. This subject has thought about it and only wants to share Son of Heaven's worries. You love the people wholeheartedly and naturally can't bear to see them suffer. We also heard that Prince Zhongshiren sent kites into the city. After some discussion, this subject feels that Prince Zhongshiren isn't someone who goes back on his words. If we don't act blindly without thinking, we'll naturally be able to save the lives of the people. That's right. Your Majesty will also understand this subject, Song Quan said with a smile. Your Majesty is the Son of Heaven. Naturally, you'll wholeheartedly consider the people. As long as we can stabilize Pang Zhishi, then everything will be easy to handle in the future. Li Chitian gritted his teeth. He looked at the Northern Ji elders in front of him, then looked at the Imperial Guards behind them who had switched sides. He said with extreme disappointment, Good. You're all very good. At this critical moment, instead of thinking of a way to solve the problem, you want to sacrifice the Emperor? What's the difference between doing this and personally handing over Daju's country to someone else? Your Majesty is noble and noble. This subject is a vulgar person. This subject also has families, and our families are all commoners. There's no reason for so many commoners to be buried with us, right? Song Quan spoke truthfully. He had a smile on his face, but it seemed like he was mocking Li Chitian. Li Chitian was furious. He loudly berated, Come, arrest this group of traitors for Zhan. Who would have thought that after he finished speaking, no one around him responded. Only Li Chitian was anxiously stomping his feet. The rest of the people were expressionlessly looking forward. The fear in Li Chitian's heart gradually deepened. His face was no longer as graceful and cautious as it usually was. Some of the Imperial Guards heard the order and quickly led people to the entrance of the Imperial study. They firmly guarded the courtyard. Your Majesty, I'll have to trouble you to rest here for the next few days. Yu Zichou, Song Quan, and the others bowed to Li Chitian in unison and planned to leave. Li Chitian roared angrily, Could it be that you've been bribed by that bastard Pang Xiao? That's why you've teamed up to force the Emperor to abdicate. Zhen is telling you, it's useless. Chapter 1188. At this juncture, being able to live a leisurely life was not a blessing, but a curse. Li Chitian looked around in despair. There were only a few spies and a few palace servants led by Xiong Jinshui left. No one else was willing to stand by him. Song Quan, Yu Zichou, and the remaining elders of Biji turned to leave. The imperial guards and guards they brought in stepped forward and said respectfully with a bit of arrogance, "Your Majesty, please move to the Yangshan Palace Hall." Li Qitian's face was livid. "Why? Your Majesty, please move." The guards were tough and did not explain much. They pushed Li Qitian and his entourage towards the Yangshan Palace Hall. Li Qitian's face darkened. He looked left and right, trying to find a way to escape. But as far as the eye could see, all he saw were the Jingji guards, the Jinwu guards, and the Yulin army. They were all walking freely in the palace. Often, they would escort some of the mistresses of the harem to the Yangshan Palace Hall. At this point, what did Li Qitian not understand? Just as he was immersed in worry and panic about the future, these remaining elders of Biji had been disturbed by the notice of Zhu Lian. They took advantage of this time to secretly arrange for him to be a bargaining chip to surrender to the Pang Xiao, and he did not know that he was in the middle of it. In such a big palace, he could not control his future at all. He was such a failure as an emperor. As soon as he stepped into the Yangshan Palace Hall, he saw the Empress Dowager and the Empress walking quickly. Both of them had a sickly look on their faces. After Brother Hao went missing, the two most honorable women in the harem seemed to have gone mad. They anxiously ordered people to go out and look for him all day long, but there was no progress. They had already worn away all of their education and restraint, turning them into ordinary resentful women. This made the irritated Li Qitian even more annoyed just by looking at them. Now that they were all caught and brought to the Yangshan Palace Hall, they had to meet even if they did not want to. "Your Majesty, what is going on?" The Empress's voice trembled and her face was full of panic. The Empress Dowager also said anxiously, "Those dogs of a slave really ate a bear's heart and a leopard's gall, daring to be disrespectful to me. Why don't you order your men to arrest them all?" When the Empress Dowager and the Empress pestered Li Qitian to talk, the rest of the concubines and concubines were also carefully observing this place. When the women talked in low voices, if they were in a good mood, it would sound like the voices of orioles and swallows. When they were in a bad mood, it would only make people more upset. With a flick of his sleeve, Li Qitian pushed the two of them away. He turned around and looked into the hall. The sun was already setting in the west, but no one was lighting the lanterns in the hall. The setting sun was like fire, shining on the paper on the folding fan, casting shadows on the floor, making the hall even darker, making people feel depressed and desperate. Bang! A muffled sound rang out, causing everyone to jump in fright. Even the sounds of chattering stopped for a moment as they looked towards the source of the sound. The door of Yangshan Palace had already been shut. Sounds of hammering could be heard from outside the door. From the shadows, they could tell that someone was using a template to seal the doors and windows shut. "What should we do? What should we do? Your Majesty, they want to trap all of us here until we die." "I don't want to die. I'm only 17 years old. I don't want to die here." Everyone was in a panic, and some young concubines and concubines had already hugged their heads and cried bitterly. Li Qitian didn't answer. He clenched his hands and slowly turned around to look at the shadows on the window lattices. Wooden planks were nailed to the doors and windows, sealing all the window lattices that were pasted with paper. These Northern Ji elders had made up their minds to rebel and trap him and his concubines here. What these people wanted to do next could be guessed without thinking carefully. Now that he was in such a predicament, where were the Li family's relatives? Where were the relatives who usually acted like a tyrant just because he was the emperor? Perhaps they had already shrunk their necks and fled, or they had already stood in Pang Xiao's camp, wishing that he, the emperor, would disappear as soon as possible. This was the fickleness of the world and the fickleness of human nature. The Empress Dowager finally pulled herself out of her anger. Hearing the commotion outside, she pulled Li Qitian's hand with a pale face. "Son, what should we do? They are rebelling." Li Qitian was exceptionally calm. He turned around and looked at the people in the room. "Are you all afraid?" As soon as he spoke, the hall fell silent. Even the sobbing was forcibly suppressed. Li Qitian's footsteps were heavy, as if they were made of gold. Step by step, he walked towards the pile of rouge and powder and smiled. "Usually, when you see me, you try your best to flatter me, competing with me in beauty, using all kinds of methods. Why don't you care about your appearance today? Look at you, the powder on your face is all smudged from crying. Just looking at you makes me sick. And you, did I make you sick of looking at me? He pushed away 2 imperial concubines in disgust. The 2 imperial concubines fell to the ground, sobbing in despair. Li Chitian said, "You should have understood when you entered the palace that accompanying the emperor has always been bound together for good or ill. Could it be that from the beginning, you only wanted the wealth and honor that I brought you, and didn't want to share my trials and tribulations?" Chen Xie doesn't dare. 1 imperial concubine hurriedly bowed. The other imperial concubines reacted and also bowed, showing their loyalty. Li Chitian didn't change his expression at all. At this time, he only felt that it was boring. Everything was boring. The empress looked at Li Chitian's back, and then turned to look at the wooden planks nailed to the window outside the hall. Her heart was miserable, but she also secretly felt relieved. Fortunately, she had arranged Hao Jiye's future. Otherwise, if Aiko were to be locked up with her and suffer with her, how could her heart bear it? How is the situation in the city? Outside the continuous camp, Pang Xiao looked at the Jing city gates not far away with her hands behind her back. She asked Huzi in a low voice. Huzi said, "Yesterday, we sent out paper kites. The news must have spread everywhere in the city. But yesterday, the city gates were not open, so our people couldn't send out the news. We also didn't send out the carrier pigeons. It's probably because the other side is very strict and the carrier pigeons are too conspicuous. It seems that Wang Fei's method is very useful." Yes. Pang Xiao thought of the words that Qin Yining had said in his ear, "Maybe we can win without fighting." She couldn't help but smile. Qin Yining was the softest place in his heart. Seeing her like a female zhuge, he would feel heartfelt pride and joy. Wang Yi. Look. At this time, the north city gates in the distance suddenly opened a crack. The crack grew larger until the city gates were completely open. Because the city gates on the other side had always been closed and no one was allowed to enter, the sudden opening of the gates was particularly eye-catching and attracted everyone's attention. Qin Yining and Qin Huayuan were teaching Zhao Jie and Han Jie to play chess in the tent when they heard the discussion outside. Today, the north city gates were actually opened. I don't know if the other city gates are the same. Could it be that the emperor has learned to use the empty city strategy? Chapter 1189. Qin Yining and Qin Huayuan looked at each other. Father and daughter could see from each other's eyes that this was within their expectations. "It looks like your method is effective." Qin Huayuan hugged brother Zhao and placed a piece on the chessboard. A crisp sound came from the wooden chessboard. Brother Han twisted in Qin Yining's arms and curiously craned her neck to look outside the door. Qin Yining was in no mood to play chess. "Mother, outside, I want to go outside to play." "Brother Han, you don't want to learn how to play chess?" Qin Yining pinched Brother Han's soft little cheeks. Brother Han threw her head into Qin Yining's arms and shook her but while shaking her head. "No, Mother, Brother Han wants to go out and see. Gij also wants to go." Brother Zhao was playing with a piece in his hand. He didn't think that he would be implicated if he didn't say anything. He looked at Brother Han in shock. Brother Han had already jumped out of Qin Yining's arms and grabbed Brother Zhao's hand to run outside. "Gij, let's go." Qin Yining and Qin Huayuan couldn't help but shake their heads and laugh. The father and daughter pair walked out of the tent together. The main tent they were in was located in the middle of the camp and was far from the city gates. However, the surrounding soldiers were all talking. Even if they didn't see it with their own eyes, they could guess the situation at the city gates. When the soldiers saw Qin Yining and Qin Huayuan pass by with the 2 children, they all raised their hands in salute. They were all extremely respectful towards Wang Yi's father-in-law and Wang Fei. When they arrived at the front of the formation, before they could get close to Pang Xiao, they saw the city gates open wide. There were people moving inside the city gates. They didn't know what the people inside the gates were doing. Xu Weiji, Xie Yu, and the others had already gathered around Pang Xiao and Ji Zheyu. Everyone's expressions were calm. They knew that Li Chitian wouldn't be able to do anything, so they didn't feel nervous at all. In fact, they were even a little excited. Wang Yi had not given them any further instructions even after so many days at the foot of the city walls. They were already getting impatient from waiting. Although there would definitely be casualties if they launched an all-out attack, which emperor in the past didn't conquer the world on horseback? As long as it was a war, there would definitely be casualties. This was also an established fact that no one could change when the wheels of history were rolling. Daddy. Brother Han ran towards Pang Xiao with his short legs, pulling Brother Zhao with him. Pang Xiao heard the sound and turned around. He couldn't help but laugh. With one hand, he grabbed Han Ji, who had opened his arms to ask for a hug, and with the other hand, he picked Han Ji up as well. Brother Zhao wrapped his arms around Pang Xiao's neck and didn't say anything. He obediently leaned into his father's arms and looked at the city gates in the distance with a puzzled expression. However, Han Ji mischievously tried to climb onto Pang Xiao's neck. He grabbed onto Pang Xiao's hair for support like a restless little monkey. Ji Ziyu watched from the side as Pang Xiao grimaced in pain from being grabbed by his hair. He couldn't help but laugh and shake his head. He waved at Han Ji and said, "Han Ji, come to Uncle Ji." "Uncle Ji, I want to be high up." Ji Ziyu was stunned. He didn't understand what the child meant. At this time, Qin Yining had already walked over. She said helplessly, "This child wants to sit on your shoulders. Don't let him." Then she turned to tell Brother Han, "You're a big boy now. Why do you always want to sit on my shoulders?" "It's fine." Ji Ziyu understood. He placed Han Ji on his shoulders and held onto his small hands. This was a novel experience for Ji Ziyu. He didn't have any children, so it was naturally his first time experiencing the joy of being a father. The child's soft body sat on his shoulders. Even though it didn't weigh much, he was carrying something very important. Ji Ziyu was about the same height as Pang Xiao. The experience of sitting on his shoulders was the same as sitting on Pang Xiao's shoulders. Han Ji was happy. He grabbed Ji Ziyu's hands and shook them. He even swung his short legs and inadvertently kicked Ji Ziyu's shoulders a few times. "Uncle Ji, what are they doing?" Ji Ziyu said patiently, "They probably want to deploy troops." Pang Xiao also let Han Ji sit on his shoulders and supported the child with both hands. "Not necessarily. I think they're more likely to surrender." As soon as these words came out, the surrounding soldiers laughed heartily. Zhao Ji and Han Ji had never seen such a scene before. When the two children heard the adults laughing, they also laughed. Qin Yining and Qin Huiyuan couldn't help but laugh when they saw the two children sitting on Ji Ziyu and Pang Xiao's shoulders laughing so heartily. Qin Yining felt a little emotional. Ji Ziyu looked like an ice-cold person, but he treated Pang Xiao with sincerity. Even when he treated Pang Xiao's son, he was extremely patient and gentle. It was as if he wasn't the iceberg person he used to be. As they were talking, a large patch of red suddenly appeared at the city gates. They were officials wearing Da Ju's court uniforms. There were at least 40 to 50 people. They didn't bring any troops or guards with them as they quickly walked out to welcome them. In front of the two armies, one side openly stepped forward. Pang Xiao naturally wouldn't show weakness. He turned around and handed the child to Qin Yining. He smiled and pinched Qin Yining's face. "I'll go meet them." Qin Yining hugged Zhao Ji. "Okay. Be careful." Pang Xiao smiled casually. "Those guys won't be able to do anything to me." He turned around and jumped onto the dark cloud that Huzi brought over. Holding his long saber upside down, he rode out of the crowd alone and headed straight for the group of civil officials on the other side. Ji Ziyu didn't feel reassured. He also handed Zhao Ji to Qin Yining. "I'll also go take a look." He didn't wait for Qin Yining to reply before he jumped onto White Cloud's back and urged his horse to chase after them. Without the commander's orders, the Tiger Army and the South Pacifying Army didn't act rashly. However, everyone was nervous. Even without Wang Yi's orders, their expressions were solemn and they were ready to fight at any time. Pang Xiao had already arrived in front of the officials. He pulled on the reins and Black Cloud's front hooves left the ground. It reared up and neighed. "Everyone, Why are you leaving the city in such a grand manner? Pang Xiao sat upright on his horse and looked down at the people in front of him. Ji Ziyu also arrived at this time. He pulled on the reins beside Pang Xiao and looked inquiringly at Pang Xiao. Without waiting for Pang Xiao and Ji Ziyu to speak, the leader of the officials stepped forward and bowed. Greetings to Wang Yi. We are here to welcome Wang Yi for the safety of the people of the capital. Oh! Pang Xiao tapped his horsewhip lightly against his palm. You are here to welcome this king? Could it be that the Son of Heaven has thought things through and ordered you to welcome him grandly? Indeed, we are here to welcome you. However, this isn't the Son of Heaven's orders. The leader looked straight at Yu Ziqiu. Now that he saw Pang Xiao, he was intimidated by his aura and didn't speak with as much confidence as he did in the palace. Chapter 1190. Sincerely? You are doing this for the safety of the people? Exactly. The ruler is heartless and does not care about the safety of the people. Anyone who had the slightest bit of love for their people would not only care about their own imperial mausoleum when a natural disaster struck. We have all served in Beiji before and naturally know what it is like to have an incapable ruler in power. The current ruler's actions are no different from the previous ruler of Beiji. We are all well-read people. Back then, we entered the world wholeheartedly for the welfare of the people and to realize our own ideals. However, the current ruler is not a good ruler. Instead, he is becoming more and more incapable. Now that things have developed to this point, the Son of Heaven still does not repent. For his own position, he still does not care about the lives of the people. Therefore, in our view, even if he sits in that position, he will not bring any new atmosphere to the Great Jew, and will not bring any new changes to the well-being of the common people. Therefore, along with Prince Zhongshiren and Duke Dinghua, we all agree with Prince Julian's suggestion to restore Beiji's title and set things right. Choose a wise ruler for the sake of the people and for the livelihood of the people. Yu Ziqiu spoke endlessly and realized that his righteous words might cause the people in front of him to become impatient. He hurriedly pressed his forehead to the ground to show his sincerity. Song Quan immediately said cleverly, "We have already controlled that person. The people with lofty ideals in the city all agree with our actions and are willing to choose a wise ruler. Now that Tayton has been defeated and the 4 seas have been leveled, it is the best time for our dynasty to enter the Golden Age. We cannot let such a good dynasty be delayed by an incapable ruler." Pang Xiao and Ji Ziyu looked at each other. Then, they dismounted from their horses. Pang Xiao asked, "You have controlled the Son of Heaven?" "Yes, the Son of Heaven and his concubines are now controlled in Yangshan Palace Hall. Those officials and noble clansmen who are not willing to ally with us or show neutrality are also controlled by the Jingji Guards and the 5 cities warden's office. Now, we only need to wait for Wang Yi to enter the city to deal with them." This declaration of allegiance came suddenly, but it was also within Pang Xiao's expectations. Was this what Qin Yining meant by winning without a fight? Come to think of it, Qin Yining must have guessed it when he gave him advice. It was no wonder that Qin Yining had arranged for the prince of the former dynasty to show up in order to win the allegiance of the old officials of Northern Ji today, since she had brought Lian Xiaozong out at the beginning and then she had written several denunciations with him from afar. Pang Xiao had a large number of troops in his hands and was confident in this battle. Even if he did not use his mind, he would still be able to win with his strength alone. Therefore, he was not as meticulous as Qin Yining. The current situation made Pang Xiao understand what it meant to win without bloodshed and without a fight. Although the brothers had been rubbing their fists and rubbing their palms for such a long time, they were inevitably disappointed that they didn't get to fight to their heart's content. However, to be able to achieve one's goal without fighting a war or suffering casualties was a feat worthy of being recorded in the history books. When Pang Xiao did not say anything, the old officials of Northern Ji were very worried. They were afraid that Pang Xiao would kill them all with a glare. Ji Ziyu said, "These people may not be trustworthy. Perhaps they have joined forces with the incapable ruler and set a trap for us to fall into." Pang Xiao nodded and felt that what Ji Ziyu said was possible. Yu Ziqiu, Song Quan, and the others paled and immediately broke out in a cold sweat. The two of them anxiously explained, "Wang Yi and Duke, please do not misunderstand. We do not have any ill intentions and would not dare to use tricks to deceive Wang Yi and Duke. There are only so many soldiers in the city and we are unable to resist. Wang Yi and Duke have brought brave soldiers here. How can we afford to provoke them? Yes, we do not have such intentions. We just don't want the incapable ruler's mistake to implicate innocent people." The old courtiers of Northern Ji who followed behind them all echoed. For a moment, the scene was spectacular. Looking from afar, one could see Pang Xiao and Ji Zheyu standing upright. Without beating or scolding, the courtiers in official robes were kowtowing and begging for mercy. Watching from afar, the brave Tiger Army and the South Pacifying Army were whispering about their commander-in-chief's might. Facing such a scene, Pang Xiao felt an inexplicable sense of familiarity. When he led the army into the city and broke into Northern Ji's palace, some of these officials immediately stood in line and surrendered. Now history was repeating itself. This time, they happily betrayed the ruler. These people knew how to judge the situation. They may be useful, but they could not be trusted completely. Pang Xiao looked at Ji Zheyu. "Lan, what do you think?" Ji Zheyu said, "It's not too late to make a decision after we discuss it." Although Ji Zheyu did not mention who to discuss it with, Pang Xiao understood that Ji Zheyu was talking about Qin Huayuan. Pang Xiao deeply agreed. He and Ji Zheyu jumped onto the horse and went straight back to the barracks. When Yu Ziqiu, Song Quan, and the others saw Pang Xiao and the others leave, they stood up and dusted off their robes. However, they did not dare to go back to the city immediately. To show their sincerity, they quietly stayed where they were and waited for Pang Xiao's news. Qin Yining, Qin Huayuan, Xie Yu, Xu Weiji, and the others listened to Pang Xiao's words and did not say anything for a while. After a while, Qin Huayuan said, "That's good too. Let's arrange our men outside the city and bring our elites into the city to take a look." "You're right, Master Qin," Xie Yu said, looking at them. "I don't think they'll dare to do anything. Right now, they're only concerned about their own safety." Pang Xiao nodded and said, "Lan, come with me." "Of course." Ji Zheyu nodded. 5,000 elite soldiers will be enough. "Yes, we can provide support outside the city," Xie Yu said. Qin Huai also said from afar, "I'll provide support outside the city with the two gentlemen." "Don't worry." Pang Xiao looked at Qin Yining. "Will Sister Yi come with us?" This was a battle between men. Pang Xiao's suggestion to bring Qin Yining along surprised everyone. Qin Yining wanted to go. If he followed Pang Xiao, they would have the upper hand. There was no need to worry about their safety. However, Qin Yining was afraid that if he nodded, Pang Xiao would be criticized. Xie Yu said first, "It's good that Princess Consort comes with us." "Princess Consort, you're not inferior to any man. Many of the schemes we came up with along the way were all thanks to Princess Consort. Now that we're able to take over the capital without shedding any blood, Princess Consort's contributions cannot go unnoticed. Princess Consort is someone who can stand shoulder to shoulder with Wang Yi. There's no need to restrict Princess Consort with the requirements of an ordinary lady." Xu Weiji smiled and nodded. This old man thinks so too. Qin Yining looked at Qin Huayuan. Qin Huayuan smiled and said, "Go ahead. Since Wang Yi is willing to let you go, I'll go with you." Since Pang Xiao was willing to go with Qin Yining to pluck the fruits of victory, and Pang Xiao's trusted aides were also willing to submit, as a father, he could only be happy. Because his daughter had never been a weak woman who needed to rely on men to survive. Chapter 1191. Yu Ziqiu, Song Quan, and the others had been waiting for a long time with uneasiness. They saw Pang Xiao and Ji Zheyu leading the brave Tiger Army, dressed in black battle jackets, coming in line. The oppressive feeling of the army in front of them, the fluttering banners, shocked the crowd of civil officials so much that fear rose from the bottom of their hearts. Perhaps these people had at most seen people being killed, but they had never seen the cruelty of a real battlefield, let alone facing a powerful opponent in a situation where they had no power to resist. It was an oppressive feeling that made one unable to resist at all. "Wang Yi, Duke." Everyone called out in unison and knelt down to pay their respects again. Pang Xiao and Qin Yining rode on the same horse. He reined in his horse and carefully protected Qin Yining with one hand, afraid that something would happen to her. His gentle and considerate actions were in stark contrast to his tone. "Lead the way." "Yes." No one dared to say anything more. Yu Ziqiu and the others immediately got up and headed into the city. The city gates were wide open, but there were no citizens on the streets. Occasionally, they would encounter people from the warden's office or the Jingji guard. When they saw Pang Xiao and Ji Zheyu leading 5,000 soldiers into the city, these people carefully hid in a corner, not daring to show any signs of threat. The 5,000 troops formed a long line and passed through the streets of the capital. No one made a noise, but their footsteps were orderly, creating a great deterrent. Many commoners were gathered together in their families. When they heard the unusual silence in the city, they were scared out of their wits. Who would have thought that after the silence, there would be uniform footsteps? Everyone was so nervous that they shrunk their necks and began to pray in a low voice. Some of the braver ones peeked through the cracks in their doors and saw the figures of Pang Xiao's Shui army passing by. The Tiger Army was made up of stalwart men who had just come back from the Taitan battlefield. Their bodies still carried the smell of the north wind and the blood of battle. That kind of awe-inspiring aura that belonged to the border army was not something that the young masters in the capital could compare to. The commoners were stunned, but they still had some confidence in their hearts. In any case, Pang Xiao had specially sent a letter to the city. As long as the commoners stayed at home, Wang Yi would definitely not let anyone disturb them. Now it seemed that the Tiger Army was just marching. They didn't burn, kill, and loot as everyone was worried about. This was really a relief. When the troops arrived at the palace gates, the imperial guards and capital guards had already ordered the gates to be opened. Yu Ziqiu, Song Quan, and the other officials immediately invited Pang Xiao and his troops into the palace. Pang Xiao nodded to Mu Jinghu, who was following behind him. Then, he exchanged a look with Ji Zheyu, and each of them gave a few orders to their subordinates. Huzi, Tang Xiu, and the other Jinghu Wei immediately led their subordinates to assign teams. The 5,000 Tiger Army troops were divided into several teams and quickly rushed into the palace to occupy important positions. When they saw the Tiger Army enter, the palace guards and palace servants didn't resist at all. They all put down their weapons and quietly allowed themselves to be detained. Qin Yining sat in front of Pang Xiao and looked down at the quiet and somber scene at the palace gates. His expression also became somewhat heavy. Looking at this scene, he didn't know whether he should be moved by the success of their plan or by Li Qitian's failure as a person. The principle that water can carry a boat, but it can also capsize, it was proven at this moment. This position wasn't easy to sit in. "Wang Yi, it's ready." After about an hour, Huzi and Tang Xiu quickly came out to report. Pang Xiao nodded and jumped off his horse. He opened his arms to receive Qin Yining. However, Qin Yining had already jumped off easily and steadied himself. Pang Xiao shook his head in amusement. Mu Jinghu and Ji Zheyu also got off their horses. Pang Xiao turned around to invite Ji Zheyu. "Lan, you first." Ji Zheyu smiled and gestured for Pang Xiao to walk in front. Obviously, he was following his lead. Pang Xiao had no choice but to walk in front. Mu Jinghu was on the left, Ji Zheyu on the right, and Qin Yining behind them. Behind the four of them were Jing Zhe and the other three secret agents. Yu Ziqiu and Song Quan led the rest of the BG elders to follow behind Pang Xiao and his party. They lowered their heads and followed them through the palace gates. It was autumn in August. The sun was still as bright as fire during the day. The neat floor tiles were warmed by the midday sun. Even though it was already sunset, one could still feel the warmth of the floor through the thin layer of embroidered shoes. Qin Yining stepped across the floor tiles with a straight back. In front of her was the clear blue sky, red walls, and glazed tiles. Pang Xiao's tall figure was just half a step in front of her. He was so tall and so valiant. However, every few steps he took, he would turn back to look at her, as if he was worried that she would bump into something. Qin Yining's mood gradually changed from the heaviness of witnessing the change of a dynasty to calmness and peace of mind. Perhaps her worries were unnecessary. This man would not disappoint her. The Tiger Army had already taken over guarding the two sides of the road. The group of people arrived in front of the Yangshan Palace Hall amidst the somber atmosphere. There was no one in the spacious square at this time. Looking up, the doors of the hall were tightly shut. There were only two Jinghu Wei standing guard at the entrance. Wooden planks were nailed outside the doors and windows. It was obvious that the people inside could not escape. Upon seeing Pang Xiao, Jinghu Wei bowed respectfully. Yu Ziqiu said, "Wang Yi, the fatuous ruler and his family are here." Seeing Pang Xiao nod, Yu Ziqiu and Song Quan led the rest of the BG elders to the side and stood still. Immediately, Jinghu Wei ran in from outside and guarded these people. Qin Yining had just stepped onto the stairs when Pang Xiao turned around and held his hand. Ji Zayu and Mu Jinghu followed Pang Xiao on the other side. The four of them came to the door of the hall. Pang Xiao ordered, "Open the door." "Yes." Immediately, the Tiger Army swarmed forward and found a tool to pry the template off the door. Huzi took a step forward, pushed open the door of the hall, and looked inside cautiously. They were all worried that Li Chitian would rush in with the women and children. But after the sound of a gust of wind, what greeted them was a pungent stench. "Something's wrong." Mu Jinghu immediately jumped in front of Pang Xiao and the others and pulled out the flexible sword at his waist. Pang Xiao also immediately shielded Qin Yining behind him. But when they saw the situation in the hall, even Pang Xiao, Ji Zayu and Mu Jinghu, who were used to seeing the tragedy of the battlefield, were stunned. Corpses were strewn all over the hall, and blood flowed like a river. The women had been hacked into a bloody mess, and their faces were unrecognizable. Some of them had even been cut into large pieces and thrown away. The stench that filled the air came from the fresh blood and organs. Li Chitian held a dagger in his hand. His hair was messy and his body was covered in blood. His face was bright red and his facial features could not be seen clearly. At this moment, he was sitting on the dragon throne in the middle and looking down at the incomplete corpses of the Empress Dowager and the Empress beside him with a smile. "Oh my God!" Qin Yining immediately turned around. No matter how strong his heart was, this scene was as uncomfortable as a pool of blood in hell. Jinghu Wei and the Tiger Army, who had rushed over when they heard that the situation was not right, were speechless when they saw this scene. Yu Ziqiu, Song Quan, and the others felt that something was wrong. They could not care less and hurriedly looked over. In the end, what they saw was a sea of blood. They were so frightened that they screamed, "Oh my God," and a few of the BG elders fainted on the spot. Chapter 1192. Qin Yining's face was deathly pale. Her stomach churned, and she almost vomited on the spot. On the way here, she was still thinking about how to talk with Li Chitian and how to deal with Li Chitian's family. She didn't expect that Li Chitian would be so ruthless as to kill his own mother and wife. And he did it in such a cruel way. "You've come." Li Chitian stood up. Bright red blood dripped down the edge of his blade and his robe into the pool of blood, making the sound of dripping water. His footsteps were stiff as he walked over. His eyes were lifeless, and his voice didn't carry much anger. However, the dagger was still tightly gripped in his hand. "Why? Why did I have to fall to such a state? I am the son of heaven, I am the ruler of the country. You traitor, I shouldn't have put you in an important position from the beginning. I should have killed you 10 years ago. I should have killed you." Li Chitian suddenly raised his arms and laughed loudly towards the sky. Huzi, Tang Xiu, and the others immediately stepped up from behind him. They neatly removed his weapon and pressed his arms against the ground. The feeling of holding something was really bad. When Li Chitian struggled, his hands were covered in blood, and he felt like he was holding a fish. It was a bit slippery, but the two had no choice but to use a lot more strength. With half of his face pressed against the ground, Li Chitian was still struggling fiercely. He howled like a trapped beast, "Rebels and traitors. You let me down. All I did was build a mausoleum for myself, and you saw me as muddle-headed. All I did was guard against treacherous officials and didn't allow rebels and traitors to bring troops into the capital, and you said I was afraid of loyal officials. You're all blind, you're all stupid. Do you still have me, the Emperor, in your eyes?" He shouted himself hoarse, and his voice broke. He vented his dissatisfaction and resentment on his family and concubines, but the blood did not wash away his anger as he had expected. In the end, it turned into a sense of guilt that wrapped around him like vines. The more he struggled to forget, the more he remembered clearly how incredulous his mother was, how his wife begged for mercy, how his personal servant hid and resisted, but was still caught by him. Li Chitian could not roar anymore. His eyes were wide open. He suddenly twisted his neck to look to the left, and then to the right. He repeatedly said, "Go away, all of you get lost for Zhen. I am the Emperor. I want to conquer the world." Pang Xiao maintained his posture of keeping Qin Yining behind him for a long time. He looked down at Li Chitian, who seemed to have gone crazy, and sighed silently. "He's crazy. Wang Yi, why don't we give him a quick death?" Yu Ziqiu suggested. Pang Xiao looked at Yu Ziqiu and shook his head. "Since he's already like this, there's no point in killing him. We can't ask him what we want to ask, and he can't say what we want him to say." Qin Yining also nodded. She also felt that Pang Xiao was right not to personally kill Li Chitian. There was no need to bear the crime of regicide for this person. It would be a stain that would follow him for the rest of his life. Pang Xiao said, "Take good care of him. Send more people to serve him." The servants immediately understood. Huzi personally sent people to watch over Li Chitian. Although it was said to serve him, it was actually to send people to watch over Li Chitian. They would not allow Li Chitian any chance to escape. Li Chitian was taken away by the arm. Pang Xiao pulled Qin Yining and turned to leave Yangshan Palace Hall. He ordered, "Send people to clean up this place. Bury the dead." "Yes." Yu Ziqiu immediately nodded and ran off to pass on the message. The group walked far away until the thick smell of blood could no longer be smelled in the air. Pang Xiao then said, "It's time to invite the Prince of Northern Ji into the palace." Qin Yining and Ji Zheyu both nodded in agreement. Song Quan and the remaining elders of Northern Ji were very surprised. According to their plan, Pang Xiao would definitely sit on the throne after taking down the current emperor. Not to mention the people around him supporting him, even among the common people, Pang Xiao was probably supported by the masses. Previously, when he said that he agreed with the Prince of Northern Ji's proclamation and wanted to restore Northern Ji's state and bring benefits to the common people, those were all high-sounding words to give the new emperor a way out. They just didn't expect Pang Xiao to not be in a hurry to ascend the throne. The group left the palace. At this time, there were already a few curious commoners on the streets. They didn't dare to approach and ask, but hid in the streets and alleys to listen for news. Song Quan looked at Pang Xiao and thought for a while. He said, "I didn't expect Li Chitian to commit suicide before Wang Yi entered the palace. It's really unexpected." His voice wasn't soft, and the old officials of Northern Ji who came with him also reacted. "That's right. I think he also knew that his dirty deeds were exposed, so he didn't have the face to continue sitting on the throne. But before he committed suicide, he even killed his own mother and first wife. He even killed all the concubines in the harem. This can't be described as just crazy." These old officials of Northern Ji all talked at once. As they walked, they spread half-truths and half-lies. Some of the commoners nearby heard what they said clearly. Qin Yining lowered his eyes and sighed inwardly. This group of people had been in the officialdom for many years and knew how to figure out the intentions of their superiors. To say this to the public was to completely remove Pang Xiao and his party from this matter. The palace was occupied by the officials who couldn't stand the actions of an incapable ruler. The emperor had committed suicide out of fear. Even the Empress Dowager, Empress, and concubines were killed by the emperor himself. From the beginning to the end, all Pang Xiao did was return to the imperial court and deploy his troops outside the city. He didn't do anything else, but the emperor had already killed him. I didn't expect that he didn't even let off the concubines who had just entered the palace. He killed them all. It's enough to see how cruel that person is. That's right, That's right. Thinking about what he did in the past, he really deserved to end up like this. Many people were already discussing this matter among the commoners. Some of the faster ones had already rushed back to the inner palace to pass on the message. Pang Xiao turned around with his hands behind his back and said with a smile, "You're quite observant." Song Quan bowed nervously. "Wang Yi, this official is just stating the facts." While the group of people were talking in front of the palace gate, a luxurious red carriage came from afar. Pulling the carriage were 4 tall and sturdy horses. Following behind the carriage were 10 bodyguards and 10 sturdy servants. All of them hurriedly approached the carriage. Qin Yining looked up. He saw the carriage stop not far away, and a handsome young man wearing a jade-colored embroidered robe with arrow sleeves and a golden crown on his head walked down from the carriage. Although his figure was thin, and it was obvious that he hadn't grown up yet, his every movement was full of elegance and nobility. Pang Xiao's eyes flashed. The hand that was holding Qin Yining's hand scratched her palm playfully. Then, he bowed and said, "This official Pang Xiao pays his respects to your highness." Song Quan and the other officials of Biji almost didn't react. They looked at the person who came and indeed saw the shadow of the Biji emperor in his appearance. I didn't expect. Heaven has eyes. The previous emperor actually has a descendant in this world. Chapter 1193. Lian Xiaoju had been by Qin Yining's side for many years, but her heart still trembled when she heard so many people greet her in unison. She was about to take a step back when she remembered Qin Yining's teachings. She straightened her back, raised her chin, and said in a rough voice, "You may rise." The remaining elders of Biji were so touched that they couldn't control themselves. They had served the last emperor of Biji, so they knew the former emperor's appearance. If Lian Xiaoju stood in front of them on a normal day, they wouldn't associate her with him and naturally wouldn't look too closely. However, now that Lian Xiaoju was standing in front of them as a prince of the previous dynasty, they thought about it carefully. The more they looked at him, the more they felt like him. The more they looked at him, the more they felt. Lian Xiaoju was even more flustered after being sized up. However, she thought about how Sir Xie had specially dressed her up before coming here. Sir Xie's disguise skills were uncanny, so no one would be able to tell that she was actually a woman. Her heart finally calmed down a little. The heavens have eyes. Song Quan was already in tears. He clutched his chest and said, "Now that Biji is prosperous, they must have forgotten." That's right. The remaining elders of Biji behind him nodded obediently. Since Prince Zhongshuren said that he wanted to recognize the Biji dynasty, they would definitely listen to Prince Zhongshuren. As for whether this prince was real or fake, whether it was Prince Zhongshuren's arrangement, or whether it was someone who wanted to help Wang Yi ascend the throne, it had nothing to do with them. They had just witnessed the tragedy of their extermination in the palace. No one wanted their own family to become like that. Loyal and patriotic? What a joke. They were afraid that they would lose their lives to meddle in other people's affairs. Naturally, they wanted to protect themselves so that they could continue to find a way out for the country. Everyone understood and immediately turned to ask for instructions from Pang Xiao and Ji Ziyu. "Wang Yi, Duke, this official will order people to clean up the palace and invite His Highness to move in." Pang Xiao nodded slightly. "That's fine." Lian Xiaoju was a little flustered and couldn't help but look at Qin Yining. Qin Yining smiled at her comfortingly from behind and nodded slightly. Only then did she relax and say in a deep voice, "Since that's the case, I'll have to trouble you all. Don't worry about it. It's my duty." When the officials heard the little prince's voice, which had not yet changed, they couldn't help but think that if this person ascended to the throne in the future, based on their current observation, he probably wouldn't be able to control any state affairs, would he? After all, it didn't look like it was fully grown. In the future, there would probably be a regent in the imperial court. Therefore, it was clear at a glance who was more important and who needed to be treated with caution. The courtiers eagerly went to prepare, and Lian Xiaoju entered the palace accompanied by the imperial bodyguards and servants arranged by Qin Yining in advance. Qin Yining and Pang Xiao stood in front of the palace gates and watched her leave with the crowd. Although they didn't show it on their faces, their slightly furrowed brows revealed some worry. Ji Ziyu said, "The other officials in the imperial court haven't appeared yet. I don't know what they'll say." Pang Xiao held Qin Yining's hand and squeezed it comfortingly. He smiled at Ji Ziyu and said, "It's fine. Everyone is smart. Perhaps some people aren't afraid of death, but everyone should want their families to live. Moreover, the factions in the imperial court are clear at a glance. If anyone has disloyal thoughts, it'll be easy to settle accounts in the future. I hope there's no one who doesn't understand the current situation." Ji Ziyu sighed softly. So far, everything had been going smoothly. Other than Li Chitian going crazy and killing his birth mother, his first wife, and his concubines, they hadn't killed anyone since the soldiers arrived at the city gates. None of them were homicidal maniacs. Naturally, they hoped that things would continue to go smoothly. Qin Yining was sent back to the military camp by Pang Xiao. He pulled her back to the tent. The 4 children had already been taken away by the wet nurse to rest. Ji Yun and Bing Tang saw that they had something to say, so they left. Jing Zhayu and the others naturally set up a formation around the tent to prevent anyone from eavesdropping. Qin Yining tiredly sat down on the wooden bed that the army had temporarily set up. Now that she had returned to the quiet tent, her mind couldn't help but recall the tragic scene in Yangshan Palace Hall. The bloody scene of internal organs everywhere made her stomach churn. She couldn't help but retch twice. Pang Xiao was originally taking off his outer robe. Hearing the noise, he quickly walked over and gently patted her delicate back with his large hand. "I really shouldn't have brought you to the palace. I originally thought that since you've been with me for so many years, I should be with you at this time of enjoying the fruits of my labor. Who would have thought that Li Chitian would be so deranged?" Qin Yining waved her hand and took the hot tea that Pang Xiao brought over. She took a sip and suppressed her emotions before saying, "This can't be blamed on you. No one would have thought that the situation would turn out like that. But do you think that he's really crazy?" Pang Xiao shook his head, a trace of a cold smile appearing on his lips. "He's not crazy." Qin Yining raised her eyes to look at Pang Xiao. Pang Xiao's gaze met with Qin Yining's eyes that seemed to be filled with starlight. His voice softened and he couldn't help but pull her into his arms. As he gently rocked her, he said in a gentle voice, "Do you remember that time when he and I were trapped together in the BG Mausoleum Palace?" Qin Yining nodded. At the time, Tian Jizi had said, 9th of September, golden light will appear. She had been so scared that her 3 souls and 7 spirits almost left her body. How could she not remember? Pang Xiao said, "That day, I found many sacrifices to fill my stomach. Later, when I brought food to Li Chitian, I saw that he was eating human flesh. He was even eating Li Guanwen, the person who saved him." Although Qin Yining knew about this, he still couldn't help but feel nauseous. A person who can eat human flesh for a slim chance of survival has a strong will to live. Also, if a person eats human flesh when he's powerless, he's no longer a person. I think there are 3 reasons why he killed his birth mother, first wife, concubines, and attendants. First, he wanted to vent his anger. Second, he didn't want his women to be humiliated. Third, he wanted to give us a shock and make us believe that he's crazy. Only then can he live. Qin Yining slowly nodded. "You're right. But when I think about it, I only feel that the Empress is pitiful. In the end, she's not an evil person. Also, when I was trapped in the palace by Li Chitian, she helped me. I heard that Li Hao had already been lost. Actually, I don't think it's that easy for a prince to be lost, but I don't want to investigate." Pang Xiao smiled and kissed Qin Yining's forehead. She didn't say anything. A single spark can start a prairie fire. After 2 days, the tents surrounding the capital were dismantled. The South Pacifying Army was led by Commander Ma Dazhuang. They returned to the Yang dynasty's old capital and other places. Because most of the people in the South Pacifying Army were disaster victims that Pang Xiao had taken in when she was traveling from the south to the capital, she allowed those who wanted to go back to their hometowns to return to their hometowns along the way. The soldiers who survived brought home the compensation that Prince Zhengshuren gave out of his own pocket. The compensation for those who died was doubled. They admired Prince Zhengshuren greatly. Therefore, the South Pacifying Army promoted Prince Zhengshuren's benevolence and righteousness the entire way. Even in the entire south of the capital, when the people mentioned Pang Xiao, they all raised their thumbs and praised him. The 100,000 soldiers of the Tiger Army were ordered by Pang Xiao to be stationed in several forts near the capital. The emperor killed the Empress Dowager and the concubines before committing suicide in the palace. The prince of the previous dynasty, Zhu Lian, returned to the palace and received the support of more than half of the ministers in the court. Even Prince Zhengshuren and Duke Dingguo, who held a large number of troops, bowed to Prince Zhu Lian. The coronation ceremony was set to be held on the 10th of December. Such news quickly spread throughout the country. When the various states received the news, they naturally had all sorts of thoughts. Some agreed, while others doubted. However, the North had the Dragon Legion Corps, the capital had the Tiger Army, and the South had the South Pacifying Army. Among the people, there were also the disaster victims that Pang Xiao had saved and the South Pacifying Army soldiers released by the army. With that, not only was there no need to worry about public opinion, even if there were a few people who were unconvinced, under the eyes of the army, who would dare to say no? When it was the middle of the 12th month, the various states all expressed their approval and support for the restoration of the Northern Ji dynasty title. Qin Yining brought the children to live a leisurely and carefree life. They no longer had to worry about whether Pang Xiao would be in danger on the battlefield. In addition, Qin Huayuan had already asked Liao Zhibing to bring people to bring back the relatives. Counting the days, they should be arriving soon. Qin Yining's mood was even better. He bathed in happiness every day. Even his face was rosier than before, and he finally became more plump. Mother, look, a big snowball. Brother Han was wearing a thick cotton-padded jacket, deerskin boots, and a warm hat. His fair little face and small hands were red from the cold, but he was not afraid of the cold. He ran to Qin Yining with a big snowball the size of a cantaloupe, leaving a trail of footprints on the snow. Good boy, Mother saw it. Slow down, don't fall. Mother, look. On the other side of the snow, Zhao Jie was lying on the ground with his limbs spread wide open, forming a small human figure. Mother, look. Get up quickly, be careful not to catch a cold. Qin Yining was so worried that his heart was broken. He pulled Zhao Jie up and patted the snow off his body. Then, he chased after Han Jie, who was running all over the ground, and asked him to hand over the snowball. Zhao Jie also chased after him like crazy. Han Jie was very happy to be chased. He actually lifted his leg and leaped more than 10 feet away. Qin Yining was stunned. Before he could react, Zhao Jie also leaped and flew away. The two children also stopped playing in the snow. They ran around the trees and rocks in the courtyard and played a game of chasing each other. They were even using qinggong. They were only 5 years old. Qin Yining panted with his hands on his waist. His face was red from running, and he exhaled a white mist in front of him. He pointed at the two little monkeys who were as light as swallows and was speechless for a long time. Ji Yun laughed and said, "Heavens, eldest young master and second young master are too powerful. They have such skills at such a young age." Qin Yining hugged Brother Zhao and Brother Han and said helplessly, "Don't do it again. Otherwise, Mother will really punish you." Yes. The two brothers happily agreed. Qin Huayuan came forward with his hands clasped behind his back. "In a moment, you two will start copying the filial piety. Everyone will copy it once and show it to me the day after tomorrow." Han Jie raised his head and screamed, "Grandfather, Mother already said we won't be punished." "Your mother said we won't be punished, but when did Grandfather ever say we won't be punished?" The two children immediately wilted. For a moment of fun, the two of you ignored your mother's worries and your own safety. "I'm afraid you've forgotten all the things I taught you about filial piety." Han Jie was immediately unconvinced and wanted to refute, but Zhao Jie grabbed his small hand, we know we were wrong. He understood his grandfather's temper too well. The more he quibbled, the heavier the punishment. Big Bro Han also thought of this and didn't say anything else. The two children dejectedly held hands and went to copy the filial piety scriptures. Qin Yining watched them walk away and couldn't help but laugh. Father still has a way. The two of them are very naughty. Han Jie is very smart, but Zhao Jie is even smarter than his younger brother. He just doesn't like to say it out loud. Qin Huayuan's eyes were full of love when he spoke of his two grandsons. Pang Xiao said gratefully, "It's all thanks to father-in-law that Sister Yi and I didn't have the chance to take care of them. If it weren't for father-in-law's guidance, I don't know what these two children would have grown up to be." Qin Huayuan was well-read and outstanding in strategizing. He had experienced ups and downs in the officialdom for most of his life, so he naturally had his own principles when it came to dealing with people. How could the children he brought up be wrong in the future? Pang Xiao was extremely grateful to Qin Huayuan. He was grateful that he had open-mindedly created the conditions to betroth Qin Yining to him that day. He was grateful for his support over the years, both in the open and in the dark. He was even more grateful that he had taken care of his family and children so well. Although Qin Huayuan was his father-in-law, in his heart, he had long worshipped and respected his father-in-law as if he were his biological father. As they chatted, they returned to the room. The maidservants served hot tea and snacks, and they all ate some to warm up. Qin Yining then said, "Mother, grandmother, and the others should be arriving soon, right?" "Soon," Pang Xiao said with a smile. "I've already sent people to welcome them. They should arrive in the capital in these 2 days." Qin Yining slowly looked forward to it. "I haven't seen mother in a long time. There's also grandmother and maternal grandmother. I don't know if they'll be coming. It's really hard for them to come all the way from Sierre." Qin Huayuan said with a smile, "Your grandmother can't come out. It's because she's old and can't withstand the torment. Your maternal grandmother's health is actually not good, but with her personality, she will definitely come to see you after such a big matter. Moreover, with your mother's temperament, your maternal grandmother won't be at ease. As for your maternal grandmother and mother-in-law, they will also be coming back for Jishi." Qin Yining thought about it and nodded with a smile. "It's been so long since we've been separated. I really miss them. In the past, I had no choice but to send them away for their safety. Now that we can finally live a peaceful life, it's naturally better for the family to gather together." Pang Xiao also nodded. "That's right, we'll be living a good life soon. It'll be good for the family to be together." Qin Huayuan smiled and nodded, then asked about the living arrangements and other matters. Qin Yining answered them one by one. He explained the location and layout of the courtyard in detail and asked Qin Huayuan if there were any mistakes in it. The father and daughter were discussing when Ji Yun suddenly walked in quickly and said in a low voice, "Wang Yi, princess consort, Boss Qiu requests to see you." Mu Jinghu, who was sitting next to Pang Xiao and quietly drinking tea, suddenly paused. She suddenly raised her head, and her gaze turned cold for a moment. She immediately put down her teacup, stood up, and said, "Jishi, I'm going out for a walk." Without waiting for Mu Jinghu to take a step, Pang Xiao pushed him back to his seat. "Don't go, why are you leaving now? Boss Qiu supported the army in order to appease you. She wrote letter after letter of apology, but you're not moved at all. All of us are anxious for you. She didn't harm you and even gave birth to brother Yang for you. Are you really going to disown your son and wife? But she used you. That's because we're in different positions. Moreover, she didn't really harm me. If you really don't want your wife and son because of this, then what do you want me and Sister Yi to do?" "That's right." Qin Yining also nodded. Qin Huayuan shook his head and sighed. "You two can sleep on the same pillow for 100 years. With such fate, it's best not to miss it. Young Master Mu, everything is just a fleeting cloud. You have to know how to cherish her." Mu Jinghu hesitated when he heard this. Chapter 1195. Ji Yun and Bing Tang stood on either side of the door to welcome them. Bing Tang lifted the bright red bamboo curtain. The air conditioner outside the door was hit by the hot air inside the house, and there was a dense white fog in front of the door. The cold air was close to the ground, and a thin layer of frost hung on the red carpet and quickly melted. A pair of small tiger-head cotton-padded shoes stepped on the carpet. Looking up, it was a chubby little boy wearing a gorilla red brocade jacket and a white rabbit fur hat. Perhaps he was afraid of strangers. He stood at the door and did not dare to take a step forward. He looked around with his big eyes and found that the environment was completely unfamiliar. He opened his mouth and was about to cry. At this time, a pair of hands gently pinched his cheeks. Qiu Feishan was wearing a dark blue jacket with narrow sleeves and a white horseface skirt. She was wearing a young fey-colored vest with white rabbit fur. Her long hair was tied up in a simple bun and fixed with a golden flower hairpin. Qiu Feishan held her son's hand and looked up at the few people in the floor-to-ceiling shelter. She smiled slightly. She was dressed in women's clothes and had a soft figure. When she bent down to hold the child's hand and looked up with a smile, Mu Jinghu's heart skipped a beat. Qin Yining quickly came out to greet her. "You're here. It's cold today and it's snowing. Why didn't you tell me? I could have picked you up. What if Brother Yang got cold? It's okay. I was careful when I came." Qiu Feishan bent down and took Brother Yang's finger that was in his mouth. "Brother Yang, what do you want to say when you see your Aunt Qin?" Brother Yang shyly pouted and turned to hug Qiu Feishan's leg, burying his little face in his mother's skirt. Qin Yining could not help but laugh. "He doesn't see me often. I'm afraid he has forgotten about the past." "Brother Yang, why don't you greet people? How did your mother teach you?" But Brother Yang refused to answer. Qin Yining held Qiu Feishan's hand and walked into the house. "He's only 3 years old. You don't have to be so strict." Qiu Feishan took her son's hand and followed Qin Yining into the inner room. Her beautiful eyes swept across the room and saw that Mu Jinghu was only looking down at his son. Qiu Feishan's smile stiffened, but she quickly adjusted her emotions. Seeing that Qin Huayuan was also there, she immediately bowed to Pang Xiao. Qin Yining asked Ji Yun to prepare hot tea and asked Bing Tang to prepare the children's favorite snacks. After thinking for a while, he told Ziyuan, "Don't ask Brother Han and Brother Zhao to copy books. Ask them to come out and meet the guests. Tell them that Aunt Mu and Brother Yang are here." "Okay." Ziyuan agreed and turned around to leave. Qin Yining saw that Qiu Feishan and Mu Jinghu didn't greet each other. After thinking for a while, he took the initiative to ask Qiu Feishan, "Why do you want to come at this time?" Qiu Feishan looked at Mu Jinghu and hugged Brother Yang to sit on her lap. She played with his little hand and said, "I have nothing to do now. All the 4 links have been handed over to the Qiu family. It's not appropriate to stay in the same place." As soon as these words came out, everyone was surprised. Mu Jinghu asked doubtfully, "You gave the 4 links to the Qiu family? Don't you care about the power of the Qiu family and the financial resources of the 4 links? Now that the Qiu family has completed the exchange of power with the hidden aristocratic family, you are actually willing to give it up?" Qiu Feishan smiled bitterly. "What kind of person am I in your heart? My grandfather was the previous head of the Qiu family. He cherished me and raised me as his grandson. I can't completely abandon the Qiu family at the critical moment. The 4 links is also my painstaking effort, and I do care about it. But now that the war is over, there is no need for me to use the money. That kind of wealth is just a burden in my hands. There will naturally be other people to take care of the Qiu family. I will just take care of the children in the future. Why would I care about those things?" Mu Jinghu still had a look of disbelief. Because Qiu Feishan's words just explained her past actions. It sounded quite reasonable, and it made him look like he was wrong to keep harping on it. Mu Jinghu couldn't help but frown. All his anger came from a sense of justice and morality. He didn't expect that this would make it seem like he didn't care about the lives of his wife and children. Pang Xiao and Qin Yining looked at each other and sighed in their hearts. Mu Jinghu was not a stupid person. If he was, he wouldn't have been able to practice such powerful martial arts. It was just that he didn't have time to think about scheming. It was easy for Qiu Feishan to play tricks in front of him. But even if Qiu Feishan had a little trick, they could see that she didn't have any intention to hurt Mu Jinghu. Instead, she wanted to please him, so the two of them didn't say much. Mu Jinghu was silent for a long time before he said, "You spent so much effort in managing the 4 links, and now you are giving it all up. Are you willing to give it all up?" Qiu Feishan stroked Yang Jiye's head. The child leaned softly in Qiu Feishan's eyes, playing with his fingers while looking curiously at Mu Jinghu. "Now that Yang Jiye is slowly growing up, and you have been away from me for such a long time, how can I not understand what is the most important thing? Some things, once put down, are not difficult to give up." Mu Jinghu was already a lot shaken, and now that he was talking to Qiu Feishan face to face, the last line of defense in his heart collapsed. He couldn't help but let out a big smile, got up and walked up to Yang Jiye, hugged him in his arms, and kissed him a few times. Mu Jinghu's movements were too fast, and Yang Jiye didn't have time to react. After being kissed, he was pressed into an unfamiliar embrace, and the actions were so rough that it hurt his little body. Yang Jiye finally opened his mouth and cried out loudly, "Mother, mother!" Mu Jinghu was at a loss. He was annoyed that the child didn't recognize him, and refused to put Yang Jiye down. He kept saying, "Look, I'm your father, why are you crying? Look at me, call me father, father." "What? Mother, I want mother." Yang Jiye cried until he was about to hiccup. Qiu Feishan was very angry at Mu Jinghu, and took the child back and coaxed him for a while before he stopped crying. Mu Jinghu stood aside like a block of wood, awkwardly not knowing whether to advance or retreat. Seeing that their family was so harmonious, Qin Yining finally smiled. Han Jiye and Zhao Jiye were brought in by Zi Yuan, and the two children entered the door with thorough etiquette. Although they were unfamiliar with Qiu Feishan, they were extremely polite and took the initiative to take Yang Jiye to play. Yang Jiye liked the two little brothers more than he liked his father, so he also smiled at this moment. Mu Jinghu was even more frustrated when he saw the child like that. Qin Yining arranged a courtyard for Mu Jinghu and Qiu Feishan to live in. 2 days later, Liao Zhibing and the brothers of the Qingtian alliance finally entered the capital with a long motorcade, and went straight to the prince's mansion. Meng Qin first came to the city to report to Qin Yining. At that time, Qin Yining and Qiu Feishan were playing with the 5 children in the house. When they heard the news, they stood up happily. Qiu Feishan asked doubtfully, "Your family is back?" Qin Yining nodded repeatedly, and ordered the wet nurse to put on Zhao Jie and Han Jie's clothes. "You two follow mother to pick up great-grandma and the others." "Okay." The 2 children were very happy, and after putting on the clothes, they hurriedly ran out together. Qiu Feishan thought about it carefully and understood everything. She secretly thought that Pang Xiao and Qin Yining were indeed careful enough. It turned out that the previous escape plan had deceived everyone. Qin Yining temporarily bid farewell to Qiu Feishan, put on his cloak, and went out with his people. Out of the Chuehua gate, through the corridor, and quickly into the outer courtyard, they met Pang Xiao, Qin Huayuan, and Mu Jinghu, who were also walking out quickly. Everyone went to the door together, and the carriages slowly stopped. Liao Zhibing jumped off the horse and ordered the coachman with the people of the Qingtian alliance. When the footstool was put down, several people came down from the carriages one after another. The first ones to come down were the Sun Clan and Madame Zheng. Without waiting for Qin Yining to speak, Zhao Jie and Han Jie had already rushed over, and hugged each other's legs. "Grandmother, great-grandmother, ah, good children." The Sun Clan and Madame Zheng were very happy, and when they saw Qin Yining quickly walking over, their eyes were a little wet. "Sister Yi." "Grandmother, mother." Qin Yining came forward and hugged the two, and couldn't help but sob. At this time, Madame Ma and Yarrow Chungu got off the carriage, and the Yarrow clan also stood beside Madame Ma. When they saw Qin Yining, the Sun Clan, and Madame Zheng hugging each other and crying, the 3 of them also felt a little emotional. Madame Ma and Yarrow clan's eyes were slightly hot, and Yarrow Chungu shook his head and sighed. Pang Xiao had already come forward to greet them. "Grandmother, you've had a hard journey." Qin Yining also wiped her tears politely and bowed to Yarrow Chungu. "Old master, old madam, grandmother, greetings." Madame Ma supported Qin Yining with both hands, and didn't care about the awkwardness on Yarrow Chungu and Yarrow Clan's faces. She pulled her to the side and looked at her from head to toe. I heard from Mr. Liao along the way that little Yi has suffered. It's not that hard, but fortunately, the hard times are over, and the good times are coming. Qin Yining held Madame Ma's hand and said with a smile, Grandmother, Sister Yi and Brother Xian are still young, and it's too cold outside, so I didn't ask anyone to announce them. You'll see them later. Ah, good, good. Dai Fu is blessed to have a pair of children, Brother Zhao and Brother Han. Now, he has a pair of fraternal twins. Brother Zhao and Brother Han had already rushed over and surrounded Madame Ma, calling her great-grandmother. After greeting each other happily, the whole family returned to the manor hand in hand. Qin Yining didn't see second uncle and third uncle's family, so she was a little disappointed. She held the Sun Clan's arm and whispered, Mother, how's old Madam's health? Not very good. Old Madam is old. She's been through a lot of ups and downs, and now she's exhausted. Now that Sister Hui is by her side, and old Madam has feelings for that child, she's in a better mood, and her body looks stronger. Your second uncle, third uncle, and your cousin all have their own duties in Xie, so we didn't dare to all come out. We were afraid that the situation would change when we returned, so after some discussion, only the three of us came out. Qin Yining nodded in understanding. Xie was such a large place, and there were many indigenous people in it. Qin Huayuan must have spent a lot of effort to take all of it for their own use, so they naturally couldn't leave it all to others. Chapter 1196. Qin Yining was immersed in the joy of reunion. He kept chatting with the Sun Clan all the way, so he didn't notice that the Sun Clan was a little hesitant. The group of people returned to the inner residence. Naturally, the elders went to see Brother Xian and Sister Yun happily first. Madame Ma liked them very much. Madame Zheng and the Sun Clan teased the children together. Yarrow Clan stood outside the crowd with her hands crossed. She just stretched her neck and looked curiously at them. Then she turned back and pulled Pang Xiao aside to talk. Son, I heard that you were fighting with the Tartars. I was so anxious. Your grandparents were so worried that they couldn't sleep and eat all day. Now you won the battle and the emperor committed suicide. Who has the final say in the world? Can you? Madam Dowager. Pang Xiao interrupted Yarrow Clan and said with a smile, You are tired. Don't worry about these trivial things. Hearing this, Yarrow Clan's face changed immediately. She couldn't help raising her voice, I haven't seen you for so long. You still don't want to call me mother? Can't you figure out who is the closest person to you after such a long time? Madam Dowager, you must be joking. We are such a rich family and you have a noble status. We don't want to call you mother. Look at other rich families. Which one of them doesn't call you mother according to your status? You are Madam Dowager. She looked at Yarrow Chungu who frowned. You are old master. My grandmother is Madam Dowager. But my grandmother is free and easy. She has never cared about status. Naturally, I still call her grandmother. I don't care. Yarrow Clan shouted. Pang Xiao looked at her in confusion. You don't care? Really? Yarrow Clan thought of her complacency on the way back to the capital. If Pang Xiao usurped the power of Li Chitian, she would be the Empress Dowager. At that time, she would be rich and noble. She would have the final say in the harem. Wouldn't she wake up from her dream with a smile? Now facing Pang Xiao's suspicious eyes, Yarrow Clan couldn't say that she didn't care. She knew her son too well. Pang Xiao was not a person who could be fooled. If she lied, it would only deepen her son's hatred of her. Yarrow Sha only turned around and said, all right, whatever you say. Is that okay? Her tone was full of tolerance for ignorant children. Pang Xiao smiled and didn't talk with the Yarrow Clan and Yarrow Chungu anymore. Yarrow Sha held her breath, but she was also afraid that others would see her embarrassed state and lose face. She could only suppress her anger and complain to Yarrow Cheng Jiyu in a low voice, Father, look at what he's like. He's only thinking about outsiders. He doesn't even know who his mother is. I don't know what that little vixen of the Qin clan said to him. Yarrow Chungu frowned and reprimanded, you still don't know how to restrain yourself. It doesn't matter if the Qin clan is right or wrong. Dai Fu likes her. She did give birth to children. But Zhao Ji and Han Ji are suspicious. Xian Ji is your grandson, and Yun Ji is your granddaughter. He lowered his voice and said, don't forget. If Dai Fu can become the emperor, she will be the empress. So what? So what if she is the empress? When Dai Fu becomes the emperor, will he only like her? She will be old and withered, right? Besides, Dai Fu can have many empresses and concubines, but I am the only empress dowager. Is that so? Yarrow Chungu sneered, then wait and see. There is only one empress dowager. But the empress dowager and the concubines are the same. You can have them all. Yarrow clan's heart skipped a beat. She looked at Yarrow Chungu in disbelief and whispered, Father, it can't be, you little girl. If you don't believe me, just wait and see. Yarrow Chungu flung his sleeves and turned to sit down. Yarrow clan's heart was nervous. Happiness was in front of her. She couldn't miss it just because she didn't like the Qin clan. Anyway, there was still a long way to go. As long as she could stand firm, so what if she was the empress? She still had to respect her mother-in-law. Thinking of this, Yarrow clan's heart was filled with anticipation that Pang Xiao could become the emperor. However, something that disappointed her happened very quickly. After coming out of the desert, the Yarrow clan put on airs and didn't interact much with the people below. Therefore, Yarrow clan had no idea about the changes in the court. On the 10th day of the 12th lunar month, Prince Julian of Beiji ascended the throne and announced to the world that the country was still called Beiji and the era was called New Beginning. Da Ju, who had been powerful for 10 years, was just a flash in the pan in history. After the new emperor ascended the throne, he pardoned the people and rewarded them. Li Chitian, who was imprisoned in a secret room in the palace, found out that the new emperor was Zhu Lian. He stared blankly for a long time and didn't come back to his senses. Pang Zhishi didn't want to be the emperor himself. This wasn't in line with his style at all. But he was a madman now. A madman wouldn't care about these things. Li Chitian was full of doubts but couldn't show it. He lost weight in a few days. Like Li Chitian, the Yarrow clan also lost weight. Originally, she came with a happy heart. She only thought that she was going to be the Empress Dowager. In the future, she would be the most honorable woman in the world. She could forget about the suffering she suffered in the early years because she had enough to make all the women envious. But now, the duck in her mouth flew away. Even if she was Wang Yi's mother, how could it be more honorable than being the Empress Dowager? The Yarrow clan didn't eat for a few days. When she saw Qin Yining playing with the children and heard them laughing and playing, she panicked. Naturally, she didn't have a good expression. Madame Ma didn't care about this. She saw the Yarrow clan's gloomy faces several times and directly scolded them away. If you're unhappy, don't come out and be an eyesore. Go back and lie down. The Yarrow clan was really afraid of Madame Ma's slaps and soles, so they could only go back. The subtle atmosphere in the family lasted until the 21st of the 12th lunar month. No one expected that the new emperor, who had just ascended the throne for 10 days, would announce to the world that he was going to abdicate Prince Zhongshuren before the end of the year. At the imperial court meeting, Prince Zhongshuren repeatedly refused, but the immature new emperor said bluntly, I don't have this ability. I can't do anything for the people of BG. If I force myself to sit in this position, I will slowly become an incapable ruler like the two former emperors. I don't want things to become like that. The people have been tormented for nearly 20 years. Someone should give them a peaceful and prosperous era. His words caused all the officials to fall silent. No matter what the people thought, no one in the imperial court objected. More than half of the officials even knelt down and shouted, Your Majesty is devoted to the people. Your Majesty is wise. Prince Zhongshuren has worked hard and made great contributions. His talent is outstanding. We agree. Sitting upright on the dragon throne, Lian Xiaozong secretly heaved a sigh of relief. She felt relaxed, as if she had finally thrown away a hot potato. She immediately handed over the country to Pang Xiao without any hesitation. She personally issued a decree that the Great Hall of Abdication and the Empress coronation ceremony would be held tomorrow. This was a delicate time. There were only 10 days left until the new year. According to the old customs, the new emperor had to use the former emperor's reign name when he ascended the throne. He could only change it to a new reign name after the new year. In other words, Pang Xiao didn't have to wait for a long year. After 10 days, there would be a change of dynasty. The news spread throughout the capital. The new emperor said that he didn't have the talent to rule the country. For the sake of the people, he abdicated the throne to the great hero in the hearts of the people. Although it was unexpected, the people could accept it. Qin Yining was taking an afternoon nap with the 4 children at home. Ji Yun quickly walked in. She didn't care about anything else and gently pushed Qin Yining awake. She lowered her voice and said excitedly, "Wang Fei, after the abdication ceremony tomorrow, it will be the coronation ceremony." Wang Yi ordered people to come to the Fu to bring the entire family into the palace. Qin Yining stilled and slowly sat up. A moment later, he smiled in relief. Chapter 1197. Qin Yining had accompanied Pang Xiao to this day. Although she had never thought of fighting for glory and wealth in the future, she had never thought of being the empress. Compared to sitting in that high position and going from one soul-stirring period to another, she preferred to enjoy the leisurely life with Pang Xiao. However, she also understood very early that they had already come to this point, and it was not up to them to do whatever they wanted. Moreover, which man didn't have the desire to control the world and fight for hegemony? Now, all of Pang Xiao's efforts had paid off. Qin Yining was happy for him. Along the way, they had all paid too much. "Wang Fei, are you still in a daze?" Ji Yun saw that Qin Yining was in a daze. She couldn't help but smile and wave her hand in front of her eyes. She whispered, "Why don't you get ready quickly?" Qin Yining came back to her senses. "Have you told the old madam and the others?" "I have already told them." Qin Yining called Ziyuan and the others to come in and help to tidy up. While helping Qin Yining coax the children to get up and let the wet nurses take them to change clothes, she whispered, when the old madam heard the news, she fainted on the spot. However, she woke up in a breath. She laughed a few times in the courtyard. Just now, she called herself the Empress Dowager. Qin Yining nodded and didn't comment on the Yarrow clan's reaction. The family was ready in the evening. Qin Huayuan, the Sun clan, Madame Zheng, and the others naturally accompanied them into the palace. The palace had been cleaned up during this period of time. Qin Yining was directly arranged to live in Kuan-Ning Palace, while the Yarrow clan went to Xi'an Palace. In the past, Qin Yining came to Kuan-Ning Palace to greet the Empress. Now, things had changed, but Kuan-Ning Palace was still the same as before. It was richly decorated. Living in a brand new place, Qin Yining could not help but frown slightly. Even though he had accepted reality, the resistance in his heart was not something he could completely let go of in a short period of time. Qin Huayuan and his entourage were placed in the side chamber of the Palace of Earthly Tranquility. The palace servants were all very cautious. They bent their backs and worked quickly and efficiently, not daring to take the initiative to come forward and talk. Qin Huayuan, the Sun clan, and Cao Yuqing went to the main hall after settling down. Ji Yun, Bing Tang, Ziyuan, and Smile were all instructing the palace maids to do things. The room was obviously a little noisy, but Qin Yining, who was sitting next to the main seat, looked thin and lonely. Qin Huayuan paused in his steps. Cao Yuqing also frowned worriedly. The Sun clan did not think too much. She looked around and said, "Sister Yi, this palace is too big. I don't know if it will be lonely in the future." Qin Yining was startled by the Sun clan's words. He quickly stood up with a smile and took the Sun clan's hand. "Mother is here." When she saw Qin Huayuan and Cao Yuqing, she bowed and said, "I was distracted just now. I didn't notice." The palace servants in the room immediately became nervous. They were afraid that the new empress, who would take office tomorrow, would blame them for not reporting in time. They were trembling with fear and could not understand their master's temper. Qin Huayuan waved his hand and sat down casually opposite Qin Yining. "We are all family. There is no need to be so formal." Qin Yining asked the family to sit down and asked Ji Yun to prepare hot tea. "Where are the children?" The Sun clan took a sip of the tea and savored the taste. "Why do I feel that the tea in the palace is better than the tea at home? The wet nurse is taking care of the children." Qin Yining couldn't help but laugh. "That is the tea we brought from the prince's estate." The Sun clan did not believe in heresy. She took another sip and smacked her lips. "Maybe it's because of the difference in mood. My son is going to be the empress. As a mother, I am very happy." Qin Yining smiled. "What is there to be happy about? You don't understand. Isn't this the highest honor in a woman's life?" Qin Yining was startled and then smiled. The Sun clan was right. Which woman in the world would think that the empress was not honorable? Women were inseparable from the fate of marriage. After marriage, they would fight in the inner residence. At most, they could make their own decisions in the family. Perhaps she really was envied by others now. Seeing that Qin Yining was not in high spirits, Qin Huayuan smiled and said, "Tomorrow is the abdication ceremony. Have you thought about how to deal with some people and matters in the future?" The Sun clan did not understand. They knew that the men were talking about serious matters, so they did not say anything. Qin Yining immediately understood who Qin Huayuan was talking about. After Zhu Lian abdicated, what would this prince of the previous dynasty do? Qin Yining's jade-like fingertips lightly looked at the black lacquered Paulownia wood table. He slowly made some calculations in his mind. The family ate dinner in Kuan-Ning Palace. Pang Xiao was probably busy and did not appear. When it was time to light the lanterns, Qin Yining suddenly remembered that they were already in the palace. The emperor would not spend the night in the concubines' palaces. In the future, when the harem was enriched, there would be many beautiful women taking turns to serve the emperor. Even if she wanted to see Pang Xiao, she would not be able to see him at any time. It depended on whether Pang Xiao was free or had the heart. When Qin Yining thought of this, the gloominess that had just come from eating with the family inexplicably arose again. Her life in the harem had not yet begun, but she already felt so oppressed that she could not breathe. The palace lanterns hung high. Bing Tang and Ji Yun brought silk lanterns. The eunuchs and palace maids went outside the hall. There were only 3 people left in the hall. The large Kuan-Ning palace was so quiet that it was as if the sound of the north wind could be heard. Qin Yining leaned against the big red pillow and patted the edge of the kang bed next to the window. "You all sit down. There are no outsiders here." Ji Yun and Bing Tang looked at each other. They wanted to refuse, but no one knew about Qin Yining's gloominess. The 2 of them served Qin Yining closely and understood her the most. How could they not understand? In order to prevent her from being even more unhappy, they sat down sideways. "Where are the children?" "Princess consort, the children have all gone to old madam's place. Boss Chiu did not bring brother Yang in. Brother Zhao and brother Han are still thinking about brother Yang. They are not very happy today." The matter of the children made Qin Yining's brows relax a little. "They have a good relationship." "Yes, Wang Yi and young Master Mu have a good relationship. Brother Yang and brother Yang naturally have a good relationship." With a few words, the atmosphere became more lively. The air seemed to be less stagnant. Qin Yining sighed. Looking at the unfamiliar environment around her, she was a little dispirited. "Prepare to take a bath. Rest early later. We still have things to do tomorrow." "Yes." The 2 of them immediately ordered someone to prepare hot water. After taking a bath, Qin Yining dried her long hair. Then, she changed into a snow-white nightgown and walked to the inner room. Bing Tang asked worriedly, "Princess consort, aren't you going to wait for Wang Yi? He's probably busy." "There's no need to wait." Qin Yining smiled and sat down on the edge of the bed. She reached out and touched the warm hot water under the blanket. She said with relief, "We have to get used to it early. He will be busier and busier in the future." According to the rules of the palace, there will be no such thing as coming back to rest. In the future, I can save the trouble of waiting for him to come home. Bing Tang's nose twitched when she heard that. Tears almost fell. Princess Consort had sacrificed so much for Wang Yi. She had tested the boundaries of life and death several times. How many times had she visited the gates of hell? Could it be that in the end, she would only be lonely in the palace? She was about to speak when Ji Yun pulled her hand and shook her head. Qin Yining lay down and pulled the blanket over herself. She said with a smile, "When the important matters are settled, I will help you prepare for the wedding. In the past, I wanted to prepare a house and dowry for you so that you can get married in a grand manner. In the future, you will come back to my side to be a steward's wife. The three of us will be together forever." Now, Huzi and Tang Xiushu have their own futures. The two of you will be madams with ranks in the future. In the future, you can only enter the palace when you have the chance. Fortunately, there have always been many people in the palace. Bing Tang's tears finally fell. She rushed forward and pulled Qin Yining's hand. "Miss, I won't marry. I will accompany you forever. In the future, there will be many people in the palace. With me here, not only can I take care of your body, I can also research more colorless and tasteless poisons. If anyone dares to have bad intentions towards you, we will poison them to death." Qin Yining didn't know whether to laugh or cry. She sat up and pulled Bing Tang's hand. "You silly girl. If you don't want to marry because of this, won't Huzi come to my door and hang himself?" Bing Tang was crying sadly. When she heard this, she choked and almost broke her facade. Ji Yun lowered her head and wiped her tears. "I don't want to be an official's wife in the future. I just want to follow you." This deep palace was lonely. It was originally a new and unfamiliar environment. When the time came, there would be no one she could trust by her side. Even the love she had always sincerely given would change. How helpless would Qin Yining be if she was trapped in this deep palace alone? Ji Yun sat down on the other side of the bed and placed her fair hand on Qin Yining's and Bing Tang's hands. "Whether Tang Xiu is good or bad, it has nothing to do with me. He has his own future, and I have my own place to go. In this world, it's not necessary to get married if you have feelings for each other. Once you get married, everything can change. It's better to leave everything at the most beautiful stage and give each other a good memory. It's better not to let each other become detestable in the end." Ji Yun smiled. "Miss, I'm serious. I won't get married. I'll accompany you in the future. I have martial arts with me. If anyone dares to have any bad thoughts, there's no need to use Bing Tang's poison. I'll kill her first." Bing Tang nodded repeatedly. If Huzi wants to hang himself, then let him do it. He looks carefree, but is actually the most successful. I don't believe that he'll seek death for a little girl. Men are like that. They'll be happy if they don't get married for the rest of their lives. "Miss, it's settled. We'll follow you in the future." Qin Yining shook her head. She didn't want to cry, but at this moment, she couldn't hold it in. When she looked down, a few tears fell on the front of her clothes. "What nonsense are you saying? When I'm the Empress, will you not listen to me when I appoint a marriage for you? All right. Don't let your imagination run wild. You've been with me for the past few years, and you've already become old ladies. I can't let your lives be incomplete. Don't mention this again in the future." "Miss," the three of them spoke in the bedchamber. Chapter 1198. Snow fell on the collar and shoulders, and landed on Pang Xiao's black sable fur cloak. Under the light of the palace lantern hanging high in the corridor, it appeared even brighter. Pang Xiao's hands behind his back were tightly clenched into fists. His heart seemed to have been viciously gripped by someone and then stabbed a few times with a nail. He had just returned and wanted to order someone to pass on the message. The palace attendant in the corridor with her head bowed told him in a low voice that Wang Fei and the two people beside her had a private conversation. Pang Xiao saw that the palace attendant's face was completely red, and her eyes were slightly amorous. He didn't like it, but he didn't immediately express his position. He wanted to wait for Qin Yining, Ji Yun, and Bing Tang to finish talking before going in. Who would have thought that his extraordinary senses allowed him to hear the faint sounds of talking and sobbing in the inner hall? He suddenly realized that Qin Yining had not come to this palace to enjoy wealth and glory, but to enter a cage made of gold. Pang Xiao knew very well what life in the palace was like. Also, inside the palace walls, Qin Yining had been locked up like an animal by Li Qitian. She hadn't been given food or water, and had almost starved to death. She had also been bullied in Kuan-Ning Palace and Xi'an Palace. She was forced to live in a completely unfamiliar place. In the future, she might have to face the 3 palaces and 6 courtyards. She had to work hard to manage this inner palace, and be a generous empress. She had to abide by those rules. No matter how much she missed her husband, she could not overstep her boundaries. Otherwise, she would be laughed at by the people of the world. Other people hoped for this kind of wealth and glory, but Qin Yining might not want it. Pang Xiao's heart felt suffocated and then panicked. He had really been too busy and didn't notice these details. He had let her and the 2 servant girls hug each other and cry. The palace servants did not hear the conversation inside, but the person who had stopped Pang Xiao was a sensitive person. Today, the Prince Zhongxian Fei had not been in a good mood since she had entered the palace. The 2 personal servant girls that Wang Fei had brought were also very cautious, so she had some more ideas. Now, seeing Pang Xiao standing at the door with a cold and hard expression and his body so tense that it was as if he was standing in front of a hard rock, no one could ignore his murderous aura and the sharpness in his eyes. The eunuchs and palace maids in front of the palace gate were so frightened that they lowered their heads and did not dare to move. After a while, Pang Xiao lowered her head and looked at the palace maid who replied, "What's your name?" The palace maid was stunned for a moment before she was overjoyed. "Wang Yi, my name is Chun Yao." "Yes." Send someone to remember that Chun Yao harbors evil intentions and intends to sow discord between master and her master. Immediately banish her from the palace and never hire her again. Chun Yao turned pale with fright. Wang Yi, this servant has been wronged. Wronged? It's written all over your eyes. Do you think this king is blind? Cunning Palace does not need such an evil person. You all remember this. Pang Xiao turned around and looked at all the palace servants beside him. In this palace, who is the master and who is the servant? If there are any more delusions like today, it won't be as simple as banishing them from the palace. Yes. Everyone responded in unison. The noise outside the door had alarmed the 3 people in the bedchamber. Qin Yining put on a small jacket and quickly walked out with Bing Tang Ji Yun. They saw Pang Xiao push open the door and enter. The moment the bamboo curtain was put down, they saw the figure of a palace maid being dragged away with her mouth covered. Pang Xiao took off his large jacket and casually handed it to Ji Yun when he entered. He rubbed his hands and smiled. "Are you planning to sleep?" He even used his finger to tease Qin Yining's long hair that had fallen over his shoulder. Qin Yining smiled and said, "I thought you would be very busy tonight. Moreover, according to the rules, you shouldn't. How can there be so many rules?" His large hand pulled her towards the bedchamber. "In the future, I will come back to sleep. Remember to leave the door open for me." Qin Yining raised his head and looked at him in surprise. "This is against the rules. Rules are set by people. Tomorrow, I will be the emperor. I am the most powerful person in the world. If I say that I want to sleep in Cunning Palace tonight, who dares to say no? You. Imperial Censor Yang, when the time comes, what's there to be afraid of?" Pang Xiao's heart clenched when he saw Qin Yining's red eyes. He had just finished fighting a war and was used to cursing with the ruffians. This time, he was also brought out. "If anyone dares to criticize me, I will let the Tiger Army directly destroy them. It just so happens that my brothers are all ready to go." Qin Yining was speechless for a moment when he heard this, but his heart suddenly brightened. Regardless of whether Pang Xiao would enrich the harem or not, she liked his current attitude. Stop fooling around. The throne has always been subject to criticism. If you continue to be a maverick, I'm afraid that people will not be convinced in the future. Not convinced? I will lead the army to beat him to death. Pang Xiao sat on the edge of the bed and pulled Qin Yining's wrist. Qin Yining was caught off guard and turned around. His long hair flew as he sat on Pang Xiao's lap. Ji Yun and Bing Tang hurriedly retreated. Qin Yining's face was red as he struggled, but he could not break free at all. Pang Xiao hugged Qin Yining's waist. The two of them had not been intimate for the past few days. Now that Qin Yining was in his arms, he was naturally a little restless. He hugged her with his large hands and said with a smile, "Don't move. We still have to wake up early tomorrow. I'm afraid that I won't be able to sleep in the middle of the night if I stir up. If that happens, I'll have dark circles under my eyes and people will think that I'm not brave." Qin Yining carefully shifted his seat to avoid Pang Xiao. He blushed and said helplessly, "All right, stop fooling around. Since you know that we have to wake up early, why are you still fooling around?" From Pang Xiao's angle, Qin Yining's fair and exquisite earlobes and slender and fair neck were as soft as the snow that had just fallen. He could not help but want to taste them. However, what he said just now was the truth. He was really afraid that things would get out of hand and delay tomorrow's important matters. Pang Xiao stood up helplessly and pinched her little butt. "All right, let's stop fooling around. I'll wash my face and quickly go to sleep. The abdication ceremony will be held early in the morning tomorrow. After the sky is bright, there will be the Empress coronation ceremony. I've already asked someone to hurry up with your gown. The hair ornaments and hair accessories will be sent over tomorrow. Dress up well and let them see what it means to be devastatingly beautiful. Otherwise, those people will have crooked thoughts and keep trying to push their own daughters over. TSK, they have no shame." With that, Pang Xiao took off his outer robe and went to the bathroom. Qin Yining stood in a daze. His last sentence just now gave Qin Yining some hope. The two of them slept in each other's arms. Qin Yining slept warmly and soundly that night. She curled up in Pang Xiao's arms and stuffed her feet between his calves. Even her feet, which were the most susceptible to cold, did not feel cold. Pang Xiao got up early. He did not want to disturb Qin Yining. He tiptoed to the bathroom with his clothes in his arms to familiarize himself with her appearance and hurriedly went to the front. Qin Yining slept until 5:45 in the morning before he was woken up by Ji Yun and Bing Tang. The two of them swept away yesterday's decadence and brought the palace maids who were good at combing and dressing to serve Qin Yining. Qin Yining's long hair was tied up high, revealing his slender neck. There was a golden hairpin on his head, which was fixed in place by a peony, followed by a golden phoenix hairpin. There were 3 pairs of golden tassels with pearls in the mouth of the phoenix, and similarly exquisite earrings on his ears. His makeup was a rare beauty. Paired with the tailored phoenix robe, even the palace maids who were dressing him were dazed. Wang Fei's wedding day was not like today. Bing Tang could not find a suitable description. It was not that she was not beautiful in the past, but the aura around Qin Yining today was something he had never seen before. Qin Yining smiled and pursed her lips at herself in the mirror. Her red lips were intense and made her skin appear even whiter. The palace maids decorated the space between her brows with a red flower. The exquisite 3-petaled peacock plume was small and unique. Other than the heroic aura, there was also a bone-chilling charm. The palace maids outside the door had been waiting for a long time. The shoulder bag was ready. Qin Yining walked out the door in the gold cloak that was illuminated by the red light outside. Stepping on the cleaned floor tiles, he sat on the shoulder bag. None of the palace maids dared to take an extra look. Last night, the palace maid who had been chased out of Kuan-Ning Palace was said to have sowed discord behind the scenes to sow discord between the emperor and empress. Even now, they still felt it was terrifying and inconceivable. When Qin Yining and his entourage arrived in front of Feng Tian Palace, the abdication ceremony had already ended. The civil and military officials stood in great numbers on the square. A biting cold wind blew past, so cold that it reached the bone. But no one moved. The banners fluttered, and golden waves surged from the imperial canopy. From Feng Tian Palace to the royal steps, the red carpet extended into a patch of golden light. It seemed to indicate that her future was bright and red. Following the rights official's loud announcement, palace maids immediately came forward and respectfully indicated that Qin Yining could come forward. Qin Yining walked forward. The robe embroidered with golden phoenix wings fluttered on the red carpet. Behind him, the female officials and palace maids raised the imperial canopy. A long line of ceremonial guards followed behind. There was an official's unique voice that confidently announced that the empress had accompanied the emperor for many years. She had helped with disasters, helped the poor, helped the common people, raised food during the Titan expeditions, and had never left him even after several life-and-death situations. Pang Xiao was dressed in a formal robe with 12 patterns of red cloud embroidery. He wore a black muslin winged crown on his head. It made his face seem like jade, and his bearing was like a dragon and a phoenix. No one expected that as Qin Yining gradually approached, he would stand and slowly walk down the royal steps. The civil and military officials saw this and couldn't help but be shocked. Qin Yining raised his head to look at the man walking towards him on the royal steps. He was not surprised. The head of the military officials, Ji Ziyu, Huzi, and the deputy generals beside Pang Xiao, as well as the head of the civil officials, Xie Yu, Shu Weiji, and the other strategists all widened their eyes in shock. Pang Xiao stood in front of Qin Yining.